11,600 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a civilization more advanced than anything we can imagine thrives on a continent-sized island in the Atlantic. Their crystal-powered cities stretch toward the heavens, their knowledge of astronomy and mathematics surpasses our own, and their influence reaches every corner of the prehistoric world. Then, in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, it all disappears, taking with it the golden age of humanity. This is the story that has haunted human consciousness for over 2 millennia. But here's what will shock you. The more we dig, the more we discover that Atlantis wasn't just Plato's philosophical allegory. Archaeological evidence, geological data, and ancient texts from civilizations that never met are all pointing to the same impossible conclusion. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you find this type of content valuable. Your support means we can continue producing highly researched content like this to help you pass the time or learn something new. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The city beneath the waves. Athens, 4 centuries before Christ, was born. The streets buzz with argument and idea. Philosophy flows like wine from the symposiums, and in the shade of olive trees, men gather to debate the nature of truth, justice, and the perfect state. Among them walks a broad-shouldered man with penetrating eyes, a student of Socrates named Plato. Plato sees a world in chaos. Democracy has failed his beloved teacher, forcing Socrates to drink poison for corrupting youth with questions. Wars rage between city-states that should be united. The powerful prey on the weak, and wisdom yields to wealth. Athens, once glorious, shows cracks in its marble facade. In this troubled time, Plato begins composing dialogues that will outlast empires. Most feature his teacher Socrates, asking uncomfortable questions and exposing false certainties. But 2 dialogues are different. In them, an aged statesman named Critias tells a story heard from his grandfather, who heard it from the great lawgiver Solon, who learned it from Egyptian priests guarding ancient records. The story is about Atlantis. Plato writes these dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias, near the end of his life. By then, he has founded his academy and spent decades thinking about ideal societies. He has written the Republic, his vision of a perfect state ruled by philosopher kings. He has explored how justice works in both the soul and the city. Now approaching 70, he tells a tale that seems to come from nowhere. Or does it? Some scholars see Atlantis as Plato's greatest teaching tool, a story designed to make his philosophical points unforgettable. Want to show what happens when a perfect society becomes corrupt? Create Atlantis. Need to demonstrate that military might without wisdom leads to destruction? Let Atlantis wage war against virtuous Athens. Wish to prove that the gods punish hubris? Send Atlantis to the bottom of the sea. The timing matters. Plato writes about Atlantis when Athens faces its own moral crisis. The golden age of Pericles has crumbled. The Peloponnesian War has drained the city's strength. Democracy, which Plato never trusted, has shown its capacity for mob rule and poor decisions. Perhaps Atlantis serves as both warning and hope, a reminder that even the mightiest civilizations fall when they forget virtue. But Plato presents the story as history, not allegory. He insists on dates, locations, specific details. 9,000 years before Solon's time, he claims, Atlantis ruled the Western Ocean from an island larger than Asia and Africa combined. The precision feels deliberate, as if Plato wants us to believe while knowing we probably shouldn't. This ambiguity defines Atlantis from its birth. Plato, master of metaphor and myth, refuses to clearly label his creation. Students of his academy surely debated whether their teacher meant the story literally. Some probably believed every word. Others saw only philosophy dressed as history. A few may have suspected something deeper, that Plato had stumbled onto a genuine memory preserved in Egyptian records. The dialogues themselves feel different from Plato's other works. Instead of Socrates questioning and testing ideas, we get Critias narrating a straightforward tale of rise and fall. The usual philosophical analysis gives way to vivid description. Instead of examining the nature of justice, we watch justice triumph over injustice through divine intervention. Perhaps this shift in style holds a clue. Maybe Plato, master of reason, understood that some truths penetrate deeper through story than through argument. Maybe he realized that humans remember tales better than theories. Maybe he chose to encode his most important lessons about power, virtue, and the fate of civilizations in a story so compelling that we're still telling it today. Whatever his intention, Plato created something unprecedented, a myth that refuses to die because it feels too true to be false and too perfect to be true. He gave birth to a legend that would outlive his philosophy, his academy, and his entire civilization. He planted a seed in human consciousness that grows stronger with each generation, adapting to new hopes and fears while retaining its essential mystery. The old philosopher couldn't have known that his tale of a sunken city would survive the burning of libraries, the fall of empires, and the rise of new continents. He couldn't have predicted that people would spend fortunes searching for his imaginary island, or that Atlantis would inspire everything from spiritual movements to science fiction. But perhaps in his wisdom, he suspected that some stories transcend their creators. Perhaps he knew that Atlantis, once released into the world, would take on a life of its own, carrying his deepest insights about human nature to audiences he could never reach. The story was too powerful to remain a mere teaching tool. It became something more, a mirror in which every age sees its own reflection. The story as Plato told it. Picture an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules where the Mediterranean meets the wild Atlantic. Larger than ancient empires, blessed by gods, and ruled by kings who trace their bloodline to the sea itself. This is Atlantis as Plato dreamed it, a civilization that began in divine favor and ended in divine wrath. 9,000 years before Solon's birth, the gods divided the earth among themselves. Poseidon, lord of earthquakes and oceans, claimed this western island as his domain. There he found Cleito, a mortal woman of extraordinary beauty, living alone after her parents died. Love struck the sea god like lightning. To protect his beloved, Poseidon reshaped the island itself. He carved the land into perfect circles, 3 rings of water and 2 of earth, each ring precisely measured and perfectly formed. At the center, he placed Cleito on a hill that became the heart of everything. No ship could reach her without his permission. No army could storm walls made of water itself. Cleito bore Poseidon 10 sons. The firstborn, Atlas, received the greatest gift, the central island and kingship over all his brothers. His name would echo through time, giving the ocean and the lost continent their eternal titles. The 9 younger sons received territories of their own, becoming rulers of kingdoms that stretched across the Western Sea and into Africa and Europe beyond. For generations, these divine descendants ruled with wisdom inherited from their godly father. They built a city that made mortal kingdoms seem like children's toys. The outer ring, nearly 4 miles across, housed harbors deep enough for the largest ships. A canal 50 yards wide connected the rings, allowing vessels to sail from the open ocean to the very heart of the royal city. The middle ring held barracks for soldiers, stables for horses, and training grounds where the finest warriors in the world perfected their skills. Towers rose at regular intervals, built from stones quarried within the rings themselves. The outer walls gleamed with brass. The middle walls shone with tin. The innermost walls blazed with orichalcum, a precious metal that caught sunlight like captured fire. At the center stood the palace and temple of Poseidon. The temple alone stretched 600 feet in length, 300 in width, and reached proportional heights that touched the clouds. Gold covered every surface that could hold it. Silver filled the spaces between. Ivory carved into fantastic shapes decorated columns that could support mountains. The entire structure seemed to pulse with divine presence. Inside, a statue of the god reached the ceiling, so massive that its head nearly touched the roof. Poseidon stood in a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, surrounded by dolphins and sea nymphs. Gold and precious stones created details so fine that the statue seemed to breathe. Visitors entering the temple felt they faced the god himself, not merely his likeness. The palace surrounding the temple exceeded even this magnificence. Hot and cold springs, gifts from Poseidon, supplied water throughout the complex. Baths, gardens, and groves created a paradise where seasons never changed and beauty never faded. The royal families lived like gods among mortals, their every need anticipated and fulfilled. Beyond the central rings, the islands stretched for nearly 200 miles in each direction. Mountains to the north provided shelter from cold winds. Fertile plains covered most of the remaining land, divided into perfect squares and cultivated with precision unknown in other kingdoms. Forests supplied timber for ships that ruled every ocean. Mines yielded metals, both common and miraculous. For countless generations, this paradise thrived. The kings met regularly in the temple of Poseidon, following laws their divine ancestor had carved into a pillar of orichalcum. They judged disputes with wisdom, governed with restraint, and remembered their duty to gods and mortals alike. Their fleets explored distant seas, their merchants traded with every known land, and their scholars unlocked secrets that other civilizations barely imagined. But perfection carries the seeds of its own destruction. Slowly, across the centuries, divine blood thinned in Atlantean veins. Mortal nature grew stronger with each generation. The kings who had once governed themselves began to covet what others possessed. Wisdom yielded to ambition. Restraint gave way to appetite. The children of God started acting like mere men. The change showed first in small things. Laws carved in divine metal were interpreted more loosely. Meetings in Poseidon's temple became opportunities for scheming rather than justice. Trade relationships turned into tribute demands. The fleets that had protected distant shores began conquering them instead. Atlantis started swallowing its neighbors. The kings justified each conquest as necessary for defense, trade, or civilization itself. They brought Atlantean law to barbarian lands, Atlantean culture to primitive peoples, Atlantean order to chaotic regions. Always for the greater good, always with noble intentions, always with growing appetite for more. Eventually, Atlantean armies pressed beyond Africa and Europe, reaching the very borders of Greece and Egypt. Only Athens stood in their way, the last free city in a world increasingly painted Atlantean blue. The confrontation was inevitable. Divine heritage clashed with human virtue. Perfect organization met desperate courage. The unstoppable force encountered the immovable object. Athens shouldn't have won. Smaller, poorer, and vastly outnumbered, the city-state faced the greatest military machine ever assembled. But Athenian soldiers fought for freedom, while Atlanteans fought for conquest. Athenian generals improvised, while Atlantean commanders followed doctrine. Athenian citizens chose their battles, while Atlantean subjects obeyed orders. The war raged across land and sea. Atlantean ships darkened horizons. Atlantean armies seemed infinite. Victory appeared certain, inevitable, divinely ordained. But something had changed in the cosmic balance. The gods who had once blessed Atlantis beyond measure now watched with different eyes. Zeus, father of gods and men, saw what his brother's children had become. The kings who should have governed with divine wisdom had become tyrants drunk on power. The people who should have been examples to the world had become its oppressors. The civilization blessed beyond all others had forgotten the source of its blessings. In a single day and night, the accounting came due. Earthquakes shook the island from its foundations. The sea, once Atlantis's highway to empire, became its grave. Waves higher than mountains crashed over walls that had stood for millennia. The perfect rings, carved by a god's love, became whirlpools that swallowed everything they had once protected. When the sun rose again, only empty ocean marked where paradise had flourished. The greatest civilization in human history had vanished so completely that future generations would question whether it had ever existed. Only memory remained, preserved in Egyptian records and passed down through centuries until it reached Plato's waiting imagination. This was the story as the philosopher told it, a tale of divine favor lost through human failing, of perfect order destroyed by imperfect hearts, of power that corrupts even the children of gods. Atlantis, the geography and description. Close your eyes and drift back 9,000 years. The world is younger then, stranger, touched by gods who walk among mortals and shape continents with their bare hands. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, where Gibraltar now stands guard over the Mediterranean, an island rises from the Atlantic, swells like a dream made solid. Atlantis stretches nearly 400 miles across, larger than Sicily and Sardinia combined. From the air, though no mortal has yet learned to fly, it resembles a vast target painted on the ocean's blue canvas. Perfect circles within circles, as if a giant's hand had carved geometry into living rock. The outer ring spans almost 4 miles from shore to shore. Ships entering from the wine-dark sea find harbors deep enough for vessels that would dwarf anything sailing today's oceans. The water here runs crystal clear, so transparent that sailors can see fish swimming 40 feet below their keels. Dolphins play in the wake of passing ships as if welcoming visitors to Poseidon's realm. A canal cuts through the outer ring of land, 50 yards wide and perfectly straight. Engineers marvel at its construction even before they learn its purpose. No silt clogs its waters, no weeds grow along its banks. The channel seems to maintain itself, as if the god who created it watches over every stone and current. Following the canal, inward, you encounter the second ring of water. Here, the naval power of Atlantis reveals itself. Warships line constructed harbors, their bronze rams gleaming in eternal sunlight. Triremes with crews of 200 wait alongside merchant vessels that carry cargo to the farthest corners of the known world. The naval yards echo with hammering and sawing as shipwrights craft vessels from timbers that never rot. The middle ring of land houses the military might that conquered half the world. Barracks stretch in orderly rows, home to soldiers whose discipline makes Spartan warriors seem disorganized. Training fields echo with the clash of bronze on bronze as men practice maneuvers perfected across centuries of warfare. Stables hold horses bred for speed and intelligence, their coats shining like polished metal. But it's the walls that truly astound. The outer fortification, protecting the first ring of land, blazes with brass that never tarnishes. Sunlight catches its surface and throws golden reflections across the harbor waters. The metal seems alive, shifting and flowing, like liquid fire frozen at the moment of greatest beauty. The second wall gleams with tin, polished to mirror brightness. Enemy soldiers approaching across the water see their own faces reflected back, multiplied into an army of ghosts. The psychological effect proves as powerful as the physical barrier. How do you attack walls that show you your own defeat? The innermost wall defies description. Built from orichalcum, a metal that exists nowhere else on Earth, it pulses with reddish fire that seems to burn without heat. Some say the metal fell from heaven in a shower of stars. Others claim Poseidon himself forged it in underwater furnaces where no mortal fire could survive. The wall stands taller than houses, wider than roads, and more beautiful than anything human hands have created. Passing through the final gates, visitors enter the sacred center of Atlantis. Here stands the palace and temple complex that serves as the beating heart of an empire. The Temple of Poseidon rises 600 feet long, 300 feet wide, and reaches heights that touch the lowest clouds. Every surface that can hold precious metal gleams with gold, silver, or ivory carved by masters whose skill approaches the divine. But the statue inside surpasses even the temple's grandeur. Poseidon himself, or an image so perfect it might be mistaken for the god, stands in a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses. The figure reaches the ceiling, its head nearly touching the roof beams. Gold and gems create details so fine that from certain angles the statue seems to breathe, to shift, to watch. The palace surrounding the temple spreads across acres of manicured perfection. Hot springs provide warm water that never cools. Cold springs offer relief when summer heat grows too intense. Gardens bloom with flowers that never wilt, bearing fruit that ripens year-round. Trees from every corner of the earth grow side by side, their roots drinking from soil blessed by the god of the sea. Bridges span the water rings, allowing passage from the outer harbor to the sacred center without boats. Built from stones that fit together without mortar, they arch gracefully over channels where ships pass beneath like toys, navigating a child's bath. Guards patrol their lengths, but more for ceremony than security. Who would dare attack an island protected by a god? Beyond the perfect circles, Atlantis reveals its true scale. The island extends for hundreds of miles in every direction, there divided into a grid of farms and settlements that feed the greatest city on Earth. Mountains to the north provide shelter from storms and metals for the forges. Forests covering the eastern slopes supply timber for ships and buildings. Rivers carry fresh water from highland springs to lowland fields where crops grow 3 times per year. The entire island pulses with purpose and prosperity. Roads paved with stones cut from local quarries connect every village to the capital. Aqueducts carry water wherever it's needed. Harbors dot the coastline, each one a masterpiece of engineering that allows ships to dock safely in any weather. Everything speaks of divine favor and human skill working in perfect harmony. The geometry is too precise for accident, too beautiful for mere function. Atlantis exists as proof that gods and mortals can create wonders together, that paradise is possible when divine wisdom guides human effort. But paradise carries a price. Perfection demands maintenance. Order requires vigilance. Beauty must be protected from those who would corrupt it. The very glory of Atlantis makes it a target for envious neighbors and a temptation for its own people. The most beautiful things are often the most fragile, and the greatest heights offer the longest falls. Still, for now, Atlantis stands in all its impossible splendor. The circles gleam in eternal sunlight. The harbors welcome ships from every ocean. The palace gardens bloom with perpetual spring. And somewhere in the depths of the sacred temple, a god's bronze eyes watch over the greatest city ever built, unaware that watching cannot prevent what's coming. The sons of Poseidon, the divine bloodline. In the time when gods walked freely among mortals and the boundary between divine and human remained thin as morning mist, Poseidon claimed an island bride who would birth a dynasty that ruled the seas. Plato bore the earth-shaker 10 sons, each marked from birth with power that flowed from their father's immortal blood. Atlas, the firstborn, received his father's greatest gift, dominion over the central island and authority over all his brothers. His name would echo through eternity, marking both the ocean that surrounded his realm and the lost continent that vanished beneath its waves. But Atlas was more than a name. He was a presence that commanded respect from gods and mortals alike. Standing taller than ordinary men, Atlas possessed strength that could redirect rivers and wisdom that could unravel the mysteries of the stars. His eyes held depths like the ocean itself, sometimes calm as a summer sea, sometimes stormy as winter gales. When he spoke, even his divine brothers listened. When he moved, the earth seemed to steady itself beneath his feet. The second son, Gadyrus, ruled the eastern portion of the island, the lands closest to the Mediterranean and the growing civilizations beyond. His territory included the richest silver mines and the finest harbors for trade with distant Egypt and emerging Greece. Gadyrus inherited his father's gift for commerce and diplomacy, turning every negotiation into victory and every trade route into a highway of wealth. Amphiers and Evamon, the twin brothers, received the northern territories where mountains pierced the sky and forests stretched beyond horizons. Their domains produced the metals that armed Atlantean legions and the timber that built ships ruling every ocean. The twins shared an understanding deeper than words, coordinating their efforts with supernatural precision. When one brother thought of expanding the mines, the other would already be preparing new roads to transport the ore. Mnisis controlled the southern coast, where the climate remained perpetually mild, and crops grew year-round in soil enriched by volcanic ash. His lands fed the great city and supplied food for expeditions that reached the farthest corners of the known world. Mnesius possessed an intuitive understanding of seasons and cycles that made his territories bloom like eternal spring. Autochthon ruled the western reaches, where Atlantis faced the vast Atlantic and unknown continents beyond. His fleets explored waters no other mortals had seen, mapping coastlines and establishing outposts that extended Atlantean influence across impossible distances. The youngest mariners said Autochthon could read currents and winds like scrolls written by the gods themselves. Eleusippus and Mestor, another pair of brothers, governed the northwestern territories where hot springs bubbled from deep earth and strange minerals formed crystals that captured and focused light. Their lands became centers of learning where scholars unlocked secrets of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering that surpassed anything known in later ages. Both brothers possessed minds that could see patterns others missed and solve problems that baffled ordinary intelligence. Azores controlled the central highlands, the mountainous regions that supplied fresh water to the entire island through an intricate system of aqueducts and channels. His engineers carved tunnels through solid rock and directed streams with precision that made water flow uphill when necessary. Azores understood the hidden geometry of stone and soil, shaping landscapes easily as potters shape clay. Diaprepus, the youngest, received the smallest territory, but perhaps the most important, the sacred grove surrounding the temple of Poseidon. His lands included the sources of the hot and cold springs that blessed the central city, and the quarries that provided the mysterious orichalcum for the innermost walls. Though his kingdom was small, Diaprepes served as high priest and guardian of the rituals that maintained divine favor. Each brother possessed not only supernatural abilities, but also lifespans that stretched far beyond mortal limits. They lived for centuries, accumulating wisdom and power while watching ordinary humans pass like seasons. This longevity allowed them to plan projects that spanned generations and build institutions that grew stronger over time. The 10 kings met regularly in their father's temple, following laws that Poseidon himself had carved into a pillar of orichalcum. Orichalcum. These gatherings combined the solemnity of religious ritual with the practicality of government administration. Before conducting any business, the brothers would hunt sacred bulls that roamed freely within the temple precinct, capturing one without weapons through coordinated effort that demonstrated their divine heritage. The chosen bull would be sacrificed on the altar, while the kings swore oaths that bound them to justice and wisdom in all their decisions. They would mix the bull's blood with wine and pour libations over the sacred pillar, renewing their connection to the god who had given them both power and responsibility. Only after these rituals could they proceed to judge disputes, plan expeditions, or coordinate the administration of their vast domains. For many generations, divine blood remained strong in Atlantean veins. The children of the 10 kings inherited their father's supernatural abilities, though often in diluted form. Still, they could live for centuries, command respect from ordinary mortals, and work wonders that seemed magical to outsider observers. The royal families of Atlantis maintained standards of wisdom and virtue that made their civilization a beacon for the entire world. But blood, even divine blood, grows thinner with each generation. The grandchildren of gods possessed less power than their parents, their children less still. Slowly, across the long centuries, Atlantean royalty became more human and less divine. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible, but as inevitable as tides that Poseidon himself commanded. The first signs appeared in shortened lifespans. Kings who should have ruled for centuries died after mere decades. The next generation lost some of their supernatural insights, making decisions based on human reasoning rather than divine inspiration. Physical strength diminished. The ability to work wonders faded. The sacred rituals in Poseidon's temple began to feel like empty ceremonies rather than genuine communions with their divine ancestor. Yet the memory of divine heritage remained, and with it, a sense of entitlement that would prove more dangerous than any external enemy. The later descendants of Poseidon still believed themselves superior to ordinary mortals, still claimed the right to rule over land and sea, still expected divine favor in all their endeavors, but they had lost the wisdom and restraint that once justified their power. This gap between diminished ability and unchanged ambition would grow wider with each passing generation, setting the stage for the corruption that would ultimately destroy paradise itself. The Golden Age, the peak of Atlantis. There was a time when Atlantis touched the stars, not with towers that pierced the sky, though those existed too, but with dreams that reached beyond the possible into realms where imagination becomes reality. This was the Golden Age, when divine wisdom flowed through human hearts and every citizen shared in the glory of a civilization blessed by gods. Picture the harbor at dawn, when the first light catches the brass walls and throws golden reflections across water so clear you can count fish 40 feet below. Merchant ships arrive from every corner of the known world, their holds heavy with tribute and trade goods that make Atlantean markets the wonder of the age. Silk from distant Asia mingles with amber from northern forests. African ivory sits beside American jade. Spices that exist nowhere else perfume the air with scents that promise paradise. But Atlantis doesn't merely collect treasures from other lands. Its workshops create marvels that exceed anything imagined by foreign craftsmen. Atlantean metalworkers forge alloys that never rust or tarnish. Their weapons hold edges that stay sharp for centuries. Their armor turns aside blows that would shatter ordinary bronze. The secret lies partly in superior technique, but mostly in materials unique to the blessed island. Orichalcum, the mysterious metal that adorns the innermost walls, proves as malleable as gold, yet stronger than iron. Atlantean engineers use it to create mechanisms of impossible precision, water clocks that measure time to the heartbeat, calculating devices that solve mathematical problems automatically, and optical instruments that reveal details invisible to unaided eyes. Visitors from other civilizations stare at these wonders with the amazement of children discovering fire. The libraries of Atlantis contain scrolls written in languages that won't be invented for thousands of years. Scholars work with concepts that later ages will struggle to rediscover. They understand the movements of planets with accuracy that surpasses medieval astronomy. Their maps show coastlines that won't be explored by other peoples for millennia. Mathematical treatises explain principles that Greek philosophers will glimpse dimly and lose again in the coming Dark Ages. Medicine in Golden Age, Atlantis achieves results that seem miraculous to contemporary standards. Physicians extend human life far beyond ordinary limits, not through magic, but through detailed understanding of the body's hidden mechanisms. They perform surgeries that other cultures won't attempt for thousands of years. Diseases that ravage neighboring civilizations find no foothold on the blessed island, turned away by preventive treatments based on careful observation and experimentation. Agriculture produces abundance that defies natural law. Atlantean farmers harvest 3 crops per year from soil that never exhausts its fertility. Their techniques combine practical knowledge with subtle understanding of forces that operate beneath the surface of ordinary perception. Crops grow larger, more nutritious, and more flavorful than anything produced in other lands. Granaries never empty, even during years when drought devastates neighboring regions. The city itself embodies perfection made manifest. Streets paved with precisely cut stones never develop potholes or cracks. Aqueducts carry fresh water wherever it's needed without pumps or visible mechanisms. Waste disappears through systems so efficient that the city remains eternally clean without obvious effort. Buildings constructed from materials that self-repair stand for centuries without maintenance. Art flourishes beyond anything achieved in later ages. Atlantean sculptors create figures so lifelike that viewers expect them to move. Painters capture light itself on their canvases, creating illusions of depth and space that won't be matched until the Renaissance rediscovers perspective. Musicians compose symphonies for instruments that produce sounds unknown to other cultures, harmonies that touch listeners' souls and remain in memory for lifetimes. But the greatest achievement of Golden Age Atlantis isn't technological or artistic, it's social. The civilization creates conditions where every citizen can develop their highest potential without fear, want, or oppression. Children receive education that nurtures both practical skills and creative imagination. Adults find meaningful work that contributes to the common good while expressing their individual talents. Elderly citizens are honored for their wisdom and cared for with dignity that reflects their lifetime contributions. Justice flows from understanding rather than force. Disputes are resolved through careful investigation and creative solutions that address underlying causes rather than merely punishing symptoms. Crime becomes rare because conditions that breed desperation and resentment simply don't exist. When conflicts do arise, they're treated as opportunities for learning and growth rather than occasions for revenge. The government operates through consensus among rulers whose wisdom has been proven across centuries of beneficial decisions. The 10 kings coordinate their efforts with supernatural efficiency, each contributing unique insights while working toward shared goals. Their authority rests on a demonstrated ability to promote prosperity and peace rather than mere inherited power or military might. Trade relationships with other civilizations bring mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Atlantean merchants introduce advanced techniques and knowledge wherever they go, helping distant peoples improve their own conditions. Instead of conquest, Atlantis practices cultural enrichment, sharing its discoveries while learning from the unique insights of every society it encounters. Even the military serves primarily defensive purposes during these golden years. Atlantean forces protect trade routes from pirates and barbarians, rescue ships in distress, and maintain peace between fractious neighbors. Their superior weapons and tactics make them virtually invincible, but they use this power to prevent conflict rather than impose dominance. The very air of Atlantis seems charged with possibility during these blessed centuries. Citizens wake each day knowing they live in paradise, surrounded by beauty and abundance that surpass anything imagined by poets. They work with joy because their efforts contribute to something magnificent. They rest in peace because harmony pervades every aspect of their existence. Children grow up believing that anything is possible because everything around them proves that divine favor can transform dreams into reality. Artists create masterpieces because their society provides both inspiration and appreciation for beauty. Scholars make breakthrough discoveries because knowledge is valued for its own sake rather than merely as a tool for power. But golden ages, like summer days, cannot last forever. Even paradise carries within itself the seeds of change. The very perfection of Atlantean civilization begins to create subtle problems that will grow over time. Success breeds confidence, confidence leads to pride, and pride opens the door to the corruption that destroys everything. For now, though, Atlantis stands at the peak of human achievement. The sun shines eternal, the harbors welcome ships from every ocean, the libraries preserve wisdom from ages past and future. And in the sacred temple at the heart of everything, Poseidon's bronze eyes watch over his children with satisfaction that seems destined to last forever. Moral decay, the beginning of the end. Paradise held within its golden walls, a flaw so subtle that centuries passed before anyone noticed its growing strength. The children of gods, blessed beyond measure and protected by divine favor, began to forget the source of their blessings. Success breeds confidence. Confidence nurtures pride, and pride opens pathways to corruption that even the wisest cannot foresee. The change began in small things, barely visible to casual observation. Palace servants noticed that the young princes no longer thanked them for their service. The ritual sacrifices in Poseidon's temple started arriving late, as if divine worship had become an inconvenience rather than sacred duty. Trade negotiations grew harder as Atlantean merchants demanded better terms simply because they were Atlantean. At first, elder statesmen dismissed these shifts as temporary lapses that would correct themselves. Every generation rebels against its parents' values before eventually returning to wisdom. The divine blood remained strong enough to guide the young back to proper behavior once they matured. Time would heal what time had damaged. But the divine blood itself was changing. Each generation inherited less of their ancestors' supernatural wisdom and more of humanity's natural weaknesses. The process was so gradual that no one recognized it happening. Kings who should have ruled for centuries died after mere decades. Princes who should have possessed divine insights made decisions based on human reasoning. The very qualities that made Atlanteans superior to other peoples slowly faded like colors in sunlight. Yet their sense of superiority remained intact and even grew stronger. The descendants of Poseidon still believed themselves naturally better than ordinary mortals, still expected deference and obedience from lesser peoples, still claimed the right to rule over land and sea. But they had lost the wisdom that once justified these claims and the restraint that once limited their exercise of power. The kings began meeting less frequently in Poseidon's temple, finding excuses to avoid the lengthy rituals that preceded their deliberations. When they did gather, the sacred ceremonies felt increasingly hollow. Hunting the sacred bulls became a mere formality. Mixing blood with wine seemed like primitive superstition. Swearing oaths over the orichalcum pillar felt like empty theater rather than genuine communion with their divine ancestor. Laws carved in sacred metal were reinterpreted to suit contemporary needs. Ancient wisdom was dismissed as outdated thinking from simpler times. The careful balance between individual ambition and collective good shifted toward personal advantage. Kings who once coordinated their efforts for the benefit of all, Atlantis began competing with each other for greater power and wealth. The change showed most clearly in their treatment of other peoples. Where once Atlantean merchants had brought beneficial knowledge and fair trade to distant lands, they now arrived with demands disguised as offers. Tribute replaced voluntary exchange. Military escorts accompanied trading expeditions not to protect them from bandits, but to intimidate reluctant partners into compliance. Diplomatic missions became exercises in veiled threats. Ambassadors from Atlantis spoke of friendship while their fleets gathered just beyond the horizon. Offers of protection carried implicit warnings about what might happen to those who declined the privilege of Atlantean guidance. The blessed children of Poseidon began to see other nations as subjects rather than neighbors. Within Atlantis itself, the social harmony that had defined the Golden Age started fracturing along lines invisible to previous generations. The royal families accumulated ever greater wealth, while ordinary citizens found their traditional privileges slowly eroding. Public works projects that once served common needs were redirected toward monuments celebrating individual rulers. The educational system that had nurtured every citizen's potential became increasingly focused on creating specialists to serve royal interests. Scholars who once pursued knowledge for its own sake found themselves pressured to develop weapons and surveillance techniques. Artists, commissioned to celebrate human achievement, were asked instead to glorify royal power. Even the magnificent city began reflecting the spiritual decay of its inhabitants. New construction emphasized intimidation rather than beauty. Walls grew higher and thicker. Guard towers multiplied. Public spaces that once welcomed all citizens became restricted areas protecting royal privacy. The perfect circles that had symbolized divine harmony started feeling like prison walls designed to separate rulers from subjects. The corruption spread like a slow poison through every aspect of Atlantean society. Judges who once sought truth and justice learned to recognize which verdicts would please their royal patrons. Military officers advanced through political connections rather than demonstrated competence. Priests performing sacred rituals went through motions while thinking about temporal rewards rather than spiritual duties. Trade networks that had enriched both Atlantis and its partners transformed into extraction systems that drained wealth from distant lands. The superior technology that once lifted all peoples toward greater prosperity became tools for enforcing submission and collecting tribute. Knowledge flowed in only one direction, as Atlanteans stopped learning from other cultures and focused solely on exploiting them. But the most dangerous change was psychological. The descendants of gods developed an appetite for constant validation of their superiority. They needed ever greater demonstrations of their power to feel secure in their identity. Existing conquests became insufficient. Current tribute seemed inadequate. The very success of Atlantean civilization created a hunger that success alone could never satisfy. This spiritual emptiness manifested in increasingly extravagant displays of wealth and power. Palace banquets became competitions in conspicuous consumption. Royal ceremonies grew longer and more elaborate while accomplishing less. Building projects multiplied beyond any practical need, consuming resources that could have benefited ordinary citizens. The rulers convinced themselves that such displays were necessary to maintain respect among foreign peoples and domestic subjects. They believed that showing weakness would invite attack from envious neighbors. They feared that any reduction in royal splendor would signal decline and encourage rebellion. But these justifications masked deeper insecurities about their worthiness to rule. Meanwhile, the gods who had once blessed Atlantis watched with growing concern. Poseidon saw his children forgetting the source of their power. Zeus observed the corruption spreading through a civilization that should have served as an example to the world. The divine patience that had protected Atlantis through centuries of growth and prosperity began wearing thin. Signs of divine displeasure appeared for those wise enough to read them. Earthquakes shook the island more frequently. Storms lashed the coasts with unusual violence. Crops yielded less despite perfect growing conditions. Fish avoided Atlantean waters. Even the sacred springs that had never failed began flowing less abundantly. But the rulers, drunk on their own power and deafened by their own propaganda, ignored these warnings. They attributed natural disasters to random chance, explained declining prosperity as temporary fluctuations, and dismissed worried advisors as superstitious pessimists. The very success that should have made them grateful instead made them complacent. The final stage of corruption arrived when Atlantean ambitions outgrew even their vast island empire. Ruling the Western Ocean no longer satisfied their appetites. Controlling trade with distant continents felt insufficient. They began to dream of universal dominion, of bringing the entire world under Atlantean rule, not for the world's benefit, but for their own glorification. This dream would drive them toward the confrontation that would seal their fate. But first, they would test their strength against the greatest military power they had yet encountered, the one nation that still dared to resist their expanding influence: the small but fierce city-state of Athens. The war with ancient Athens. 10,000 years before the Parthenon would crown the Acropolis, Athens was already ancient. Not the Athens of marble temples and philosophical schools, but something older and fiercer, a warrior city carved from Attic stone and defended by citizens who valued freedom above life itself. This prehistoric Athens would face the greatest test in human history, standing alone against the unstoppable might of Atlantean Empire. The confrontation had been building for generations. Atlantean fleets, once content to trade with Mediterranean peoples, began demanding tribute instead of offering exchange. Their armies, supposedly protecting smaller nations from barbarian raids, started occupying the very cities they claimed to defend. One by one, the free peoples of the ancient world found themselves choosing between submission and destruction. Most chose submission. How could scattered city-states resist an empire that commanded resources beyond imagination? Atlantean ships darkened every horizon. Their armies moved with precision that made disciplined Spartans look like amateur militias. Their weapons, forged from metals unknown to other peoples, cut through bronze armor like cloth. Resistance seemed not just futile but suicidal. Egypt fell first, its ancient pharaohs reduced to puppet rulers, collecting tribute for distant masters. The river that had sustained civilization for millennia now served primarily to transport wealth westward toward Atlantis. Mesopotamian cities, birthplaces of agriculture and writing, found their ziggurat temples hosting Atlantean governors alongside local gods. Africa's tribal kingdoms discovered that their gold and ivory were no longer theirs to trade, but Atlantean property to be extracted according to imperial schedules. European settlements that had begun developing their own cultures were frozen in subordinate roles, forbidden to advance beyond levels that might threaten Atlantean dominance. But Athens refused the choice between submission and destruction, creating a third option that no one had thought possible. The Athenians chose defiance. Not the calculated resistance of those who hoped to negotiate better terms, but absolute refusal to acknowledge Atlantean authority over free Greek soil. The decision puzzled Atlantean strategists. Athens possessed no supernatural technologies, no divine bloodlines, no resources that couldn't be found elsewhere in greater abundance. Their population numbered in thousands rather than millions. Their territory could fit comfortably within a single Atlantean province. By every reasonable measure, the contest was already over before it began. Atlantean ambassadors arrived in Athens with generous offers. Submit voluntarily, they suggested, and Athens could retain significant autonomy while enjoying the benefits of imperial protection. Atlantean technology would improve Athenian agriculture. Atlantean medicine would extend Athenian lives. Atlantean knowledge would advance Athenian civilization beyond anything possible through independent development. The Athenian response was simple. No. Not conditional refusal pending better terms. Not delayed acceptance requiring internal negotiations. Just no, delivered with the finality of stone falling into deep water. The ambassadors departed in confusion, unable to comprehend a people who would reject obvious advantages for the sake of intangible principles. War became inevitable. Atlantean pride demanded punishment for such unprecedented defiance. Imperial logic required demonstration that resistance led only to destruction. The entire structure of Atlantean dominance rested on the belief that opposition was impossible. Athens threatened that foundation simply by existing as a free city. The Atlantean war machine mobilized with efficiency that astounded even its own commanders. Ships launched from every harbor across the empire, carrying armies equipped with the finest weapons ever forged. Engineers prepared siege equipment that could level mountains. Logistics officers calculated supplies for campaigns that might last decades if necessary. But Athens was already at war before the first Atlantean ship appeared on the horizon. War against complacency, against despair, against the reasonable voice that whispered surrender. Athenian citizens transformed their city into a fortress, not just of stone and bronze, but of will and purpose that bent but never broke. Every man trained for battle regardless of age or occupation. Every woman learned skills that would keep the city functioning during siege. Children too young to fight served as messengers and scouts. The elderly shared memories of ancient tactics and strategies. Athens became a single organism dedicated entirely to survival and freedom. When Atlantean forces finally arrived, they found not the frightened population they expected, but a hornet's nest of organized resistance. The harbor bristled with fire ships ready to ram approaching vessels. The walls sprouted engines that hurled stones and spears with devastating accuracy. Every street became a potential battlefield prepared for house-to-house fighting. The naval battle lasted 3 days and nights. Atlantean ships, larger and more advanced than anything the Greeks had ever built, should have swept Athenian defenders from the sea in hours. But the Athenians had studied their enemies' tactics and developed counters that turned superior technology into liability. Small, fast Greek vessels attacked in coordinated swarms that overwhelmed Atlantean defensive systems. Fire ships, guided by volunteer crews who stayed aboard until the last possible moment, penetrated Atlantean formations and caused catastrophic damage. Underwater swimmers, trained to hold their breath for impossible lengths, sabotaged enemy vessels from below. The siege that followed tested both sides beyond their limits. Atlantean armies surrounded Athens completely, cutting off all supplies and communications with the outside world. Their siege engines, powered by mechanisms that defied Greek understanding, battered the walls day and night. Starvation and disease stalked the defenders as surely as enemy soldiers. But Athens held. Somehow, impossibly, the city endured everything Atlantean power could bring to bear. Citizens died by thousands, but those who remained fought with ferocity that transformed ordinary humans into legendary heroes. Women took up weapons when their husbands fell. Children carried water to archers manning the walls. The elderly shared their final meals with younger defenders. The psychological impact spread far beyond Athens itself. Other conquered peoples, watching from enforced submission, began to wonder whether Atlantean invincibility was real or merely assumed. If Athens could resist, perhaps resistance was possible elsewhere. If one city could defy the empire, perhaps the empire wasn't truly unstoppable. Atlantean commanders, faced with unexpected prolonged resistance, made increasingly desperate decisions. They diverted forces from other regions, weakening control over recently conquered territories. They demanded additional tribute from subject peoples to fund the expanding war effort, creating resentment where there had been resignation. They sacrificed long-term strategic goals for short-term tactical advantages. But most importantly, they began to lose the moral authority that had justified their dominance. An empire that claimed to bring civilization and prosperity to barbarian lands was spending years trying to destroy a single city whose only crime was preferring freedom to comfort. The contradiction became obvious to everyone, including many Atlanteans themselves. The war raged across land and sea, drawing in allies and enemies from across the known world. Some fought for Athens out of admiration for its courage. Others supported Atlantis from fear of its power, but the central drama remained unchanged. Could human will triumph over divine heritage? Could mortal courage overcome supernatural advantage? The answer would reshape the world and echo through history. But first, the gods themselves would enter the conflict, adding divine judgment to human warfare and ensuring that the outcome would satisfy cosmic justice as well as military necessity. The cataclysm, the city sinks high above the Mediterranean. Zeus watched the war with eyes that had seen the birth of stars and the death of titans. The king of gods weighed mortal hearts in scales that measured not just actions but intentions, not just deeds, but the spiritual forces that drove them. What he saw in the struggle between Athens and Atlantis troubled him more deeply than any challenge to divine authority. Below, the siege dragged through its third year. Athens still stood, bloodied but unbroken, its walls scarred by Atlantean engines but never breached. The city had become something more than human in its defiance, transformed by suffering into a symbol that burned in the consciousness of every enslaved people. Freedom lived in Athens, and as long as the city survived, tyranny could never claim complete victory. But Atlantis had also transformed, and not for the better. The descendants of Poseidon, once wise rulers guided by divine wisdom, had become something terrible in their frustrated rage. Unable to break Athens through military might, they turned to methods that violated every principle their ancestors had honored: poison in water supplies, attacks on civilians, threats against children. The corruption that had been growing in Atlantean hearts for generations now showed its true face. The veneer of civilization stripped away to reveal appetites that would devour the world if left unchecked. Zeus saw what would happen if such beings achieved the universal dominion they craved. Freedom would die everywhere. Justice would become a memory. The entire human race would serve as slaves to feed Atlantean appetites. This could not be permitted. Divine patience, stretched across millennia of tolerance for human failings, reached its absolute limit. The time for warnings had passed. The moment for judgment had arrived. Zeus raised his hand, and thunder rolled across skies that had known only gentle winds. The first earthquake struck at dawn on what would be Atlantis's final day. Not the gentle tremor that warns of greater violence to come, but a convulsion that shook the island from its very foundations. In the harbor, Atlantean ships lurched against their moorings as water sloshed back and forth like wine in a dropped cup. On land, buildings that had stood for millennia swayed like wheat in a hurricane. But this was only the beginning. Zeus had decided that Atlantis must not merely fall, but vanish so completely that future generations would question whether it had ever existed. The lesson must be absolute, unforgettable, carved into the earth itself, where neither time nor human forgetfulness could erase it. Poseidon felt his brother's intention and knew he could not resist it. Divine justice, once invoked by the king of gods, bound even the lords of sea and storm. The ocean that had protected Atlantis for so long would become its grave. The waters that had carried Atlantean ships to every corner of the world would close over their home forever. The god of the sea gathered forces that mortals could not imagine. Currents that spanned oceans converged on the doomed island. Tides that should have taken days to build rose in hours. The very ocean floor cracked and shifted, opening chasms that led to the planet's molten heart. Poseidon wept for his children, even as he prepared their destruction. On Atlantis, the royal families finally understood what their hubris had purchased. The second earthquake, far stronger than the first, toppled the brass walls that had gleamed in sunlight for countless generations. The third split the perfect circles that Poseidon had carved with his own hands. The palace of the gods cracked open like an egg, spilling treasures accumulated across millennia into waters that boiled with supernatural heat. Citizens who had never known fear discovered terror beyond description. These were people whose ancestors had conquered half the world, whose fleets ruled every ocean, whose technology surpassed anything achieved by other civilizations. But all their power meant nothing against forces that operated beyond the realm of human understanding. Some tried to escape in ships, loading them with gold and gems as if wealth could purchase safety from divine wrath. The harbor waters, churning with unnatural violence, swallowed vessels before they could reach open sea. Others fled to the highest mountains, hoping elevation might protect them from whatever was coming. They found only better views of their approaching doom. The fourth earthquake opened the great rift that would become Atlantis's tomb. Starting at the center of the island, where Poseidon's temple had stood for ages, a crack appeared that was deeper than human eyes could penetrate and wider than the greatest rivers. Steam rose from its depths, carrying smells of sulfur and melted rock that spoke of the Earth's molten interior. From this rift came the sound that would haunt the nightmares of every survivor who lived to tell the tale. Not the rumble of breaking stone or the roar of rushing water, but something else entirely. A grinding, tearing noise that seemed to come from the planet itself, as if the Earth were screaming in pain. It was the sound of a continent dying. The ocean responded to this wound like blood rushing to fill a severed artery. Water poured into the rift with violence that defied natural law, creating whirlpools large enough to swallow cities. The perfect rings that had defined Atlantean geography collapsed into the growing chasm, carrying with them everything that had made the civilization great. Libraries containing knowledge that would not be rediscovered for millennia tumbled into the abyss. Workshops where craftsmen had forged wonders from impossible metals crumbled into rubble that sank beyond recovery. Gardens where flowers had bloomed eternally were swept away by torrents that turned beauty into debris. But the most terrible loss was human. Hundreds of thousands of people, many of them innocent of their rulers' crimes, perished in a catastrophe that allowed no distinction between the guilty and the merely unfortunate. Children who had never heard of Athens died alongside the kings who had ordered its destruction. Artists whose only crime was creating beauty vanished with the politicians who had corrupted their society. The ocean, having tasted the island's destruction, developed an appetite that grew with feeding. Waves higher than mountains crashed over lands that had never known flooding. The very sea floor buckled and shifted, creating new abysses while destroying ancient landmarks. What had been solid ground for millions of years became churning water in the space of hours. As the sun reached its zenith on that final day, the last remnants of Atlantean civilization slipped beneath the waves. The temple of Poseidon, its gold and ivory decorations still gleaming, sank slowly into depths that would hide it forever. The statue of the god, so lifelike that it had seemed to breathe, disappeared into darkness that no light would ever penetrate again. By sunset, only empty ocean marked where the greatest civilization in human history had flourished. Waves that had been crashing against marble walls now rolled across abyssal depths without obstruction. Fish that had sheltered in Atlantean harbors found themselves swimming over ruins buried beneath miles of salt water. The few survivors, those who had been traveling abroad when catastrophe struck, brought confused reports of their homeland's fate. But who could believe such impossible tales? Entire continents didn't simply vanish overnight. Civilizations that commanded supernatural power didn't disappear without trace. The stories seemed too fantastic for rational minds to accept. Within generations, Atlantis had become legend. Within centuries, legend became myth. Within millennia, myth became the stuff of philosophical allegory. The greatest city ever built, the most advanced civilization ever achieved, the clearest example of both human potential and human failing, had been erased so completely that future ages would debate whether it had ever existed at all. But the ocean remembered. In its deepest trenches, where pressure would crush any vessel brave enough to descend, the remains of Atlantis waited in eternal darkness. Broken columns and scattered statues, manuscripts written in languages that would never be spoken again, treasures that had once purchased the loyalty of nations, all lay in silence beneath waters that kept their secrets well. And sometimes, on calm days when the sea ran glass smooth and the light penetrated deeper than usual, fishermen claimed they could see shadows far below. Shapes too regular to be natural, too grand to be accidental. The memory of a sunken world, preserved in salt water and legend, waiting for the day when the ocean might reveal what divine justice had hidden. Myth or memory? Early interpretations. In the centuries following Plato's death, his tale of Atlantis sparked debates that echoed through the marble halls of ancient academies and the torchlit libraries of Alexandria. Was the story history preserved in philosophical dress, or philosophy dressed as history? The question obsessed scholars who understood that the answer would reshape their understanding of both the past and the possibilities of human civilization. Crantor of Soli, one of Plato's earliest followers, declared the story absolutely true. Writing less than a century after his master's death, Crantor claimed to have consulted the very Egyptian records that Plato described. According to his investigations, priests at Sais still possessed columns inscribed with hieroglyphs telling the Atlantis story exactly as Plato had related it. The tale wasn't allegory, but genuine history preserved across millennia. But Crantor's certainty troubled other scholars. Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, dismissed Atlantis as pure invention. He who created it also destroyed it, the great philosopher declared with characteristic bluntness. To Aristotle's practical mind, the story served obvious philosophical purposes, demonstrating ideal government principles and showing the consequences of moral corruption. Why search for literal truth in what was clearly a teaching tool? This division between believers and skeptics established a pattern that would persist through all subsequent discussions of Atlantis. Evidence remained tantalizingly incomplete, neither proving nor disproving the story's historical foundation. Egyptian records that might have settled the debate had vanished into the same darkness that swallowed so many ancient texts. Without definitive proof either way, interpretation became a matter of temperament and philosophical inclination. Plutarch, the wise biographer who captured the lives of ancient heroes, approached Atlantis with characteristic balance. He noted that many cultures preserved flood legends remarkably similar to Plato's account. Perhaps the Greek philosopher had indeed preserved genuine memories, even if he'd shaped them to serve his philosophical purposes. Truth and symbolism need not exclude each other, Plutarch suggested. History could carry meaning deeper than mere chronology. The Neoplatonist philosophers of later centuries embraced this middle path with enthusiasm. Proclus, writing in the 5th century after Christ, argued that Plato's dialogues operated on multiple levels simultaneously. The surface narrative preserved historical events, while deeper meanings revealed eternal truths about the soul's journey and the cosmos's hidden structures. Atlantis was both real place and symbolic representation, both historical fact and spiritual allegory. This interpretation allowed ancient scholars to have their philosophical cake and eat their historical meal too. They could study Atlantis as a case study in political decline, while also using it to explore metaphysical questions about time, space, and divine justice. The story became richer through this layered reading, offering insights that purely historical or purely allegorical approaches missed. But the question of evidence continued to nag at careful thinkers. If Atlantis had been real, where were the traces that such a massive civilization should have left behind? Ancient scholars possessed detailed knowledge of Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and other historical civilizations. They could trace cultural influences across continents and through centuries. Yet Atlantis seemed to have vanished without leaving the usual archaeological fingerprints. Some explain this absence through the very completeness of the destruction Plato described. Divine wrath had erased Atlantis so thoroughly that future generations found no traces to study. The ocean had swallowed not just the physical city, but every artifact, every record, every piece of evidence that might have confirmed its existence. Only the Egyptian priests' sacred records had preserved memory of the lost civilization. Others pointed to practical difficulties in ancient record-keeping. Thousands of years had passed between Atlantis's supposed destruction and Plato's account. Even genuine historical events could become corrupted beyond recognition across such vast temporal distances. Perhaps Atlantis represented a dimly remembered catastrophe, the eruption of Thera, the flooding of the Black Sea, or some other real disaster that had grown in the telling until it became unrecognizable. The mystery deepened when scholars examined Plato's usual methods. The philosopher typically identified his sources when drawing on historical material. He cited Homer, referenced contemporary events, and acknowledged the thinkers who influenced his ideas. But for Atlantis, he offered only a chain of oral transmissions stretching back through centuries. Critias heard it from his grandfather, who heard it from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests. Such distant sourcing was unusual for a thinker who normally demanded precision. Yet the story's very strangeness argued for its authenticity in some minds. Would Plato have invented details so specific and so difficult to verify? The date, 9,000 years before Solon's time, placed Atlantis far beyond any historical period known to Greek scholarship. The location beyond the Pillars of Hercules lay in waters no Greek had thoroughly explored. The level of technological and social development described exceeded anything achieved by known civilizations. These details seem too elaborate and too peripheral to Plato's main philosophical points to be pure invention. A fictional Atlantis needed only enough detail to support the moral lessons about justice and corruption. The extensive geographical descriptions, the precise measurements, the complex governmental structures, all seemed excessive if the story served purely allegorical purposes. Religious thinkers found additional reasons to believe in Atlantis's historical reality. The story aligned with widespread traditions about divine punishment for human wickedness. Flood narratives appeared in cultures around the world, from the Hebrew account of Noah to Mesopotamian tales of Utnapishtim. Perhaps these various traditions preserved different perspectives on the same cosmic catastrophe that had destroyed Atlantis. Early Christian scholars particularly appreciated this interpretation. It allowed them to see Atlantis as a pagan parallel to biblical narratives, demonstrating that God's justice operated throughout human history. The destruction of Atlantis became a prefiguring of divine judgment, showing that no civilization, regardless of its power or achievements, could escape the consequences of moral corruption. But other Christian thinkers worried about accepting pagan sources as historical truth. If Atlantis was real, it complicated biblical chronology and suggested that advanced civilizations had existed far earlier than Scripture seemed to indicate. Better to treat the story as philosophical allegory that happened to echo biblical themes than to risk undermining religious authority by embracing questionable historical claims. As centuries passed and the ancient world gave way to medieval scholarship, the debate about Atlantis gradually transformed. Later thinkers inherited the arguments of their predecessors, but lacked direct access to many ancient sources. They worked from summaries, translations, and fragments rather than complete texts. The question of Atlantis's reality became increasingly theoretical, removed from any possibility of verification through primary evidence. Yet the story's power remained undiminished. Each generation of scholars rediscovered Plato's tale and grappled with its implications. Some accepted it as history, others rejected it as fiction, and many sought middle ground that preserved both its factual and symbolic dimensions. The ancient interpretations established patterns of thought that would influence every subsequent approach to the Atlantis mystery. The early scholars had identified the central paradox that would haunt all future investigations. Atlantis felt both too fantastic to be true and too detailed to be entirely false. This tension between skepticism and wonder, between rational analysis and imaginative possibility, became the defining characteristic of Atlantean studies. The mystery had taken on a life of its own, growing stronger with each attempt to solve it definitively. The Egyptians, the keepers of forgotten stories, along the life-giving Nile, where civilization first learned to read the stars and measure the flood, priests in white linen robes tended memories older than the pyramids. In the sacred city of Sais, within temple walls that had stood since time immemorial, these guardians of ancient wisdom preserved records that reached back to the very beginning of human history. The priests spoke to Greek visitors with the patient authority of those who measured time in millennia rather than years. "You Greeks are but children," they told Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver, when he came seeking knowledge during his travels. "You have no ancient learning, no hoary tradition. You know nothing of the past." Their words carried no mockery, only the sad certainty of those who remembered what others had forgotten. Egypt was already ancient when Greece was young. While Greek tribes were still learning to work bronze, Egyptian scribes were recording the deeds of pharaohs whose names would echo through eternity. Their libraries contained chronicles stretching back 9,000 years before Solon's time, preserving accounts of civilizations that had risen and fallen while the Greek cities were still dreams in their founders' minds. These priests possessed something that no other people could claim: unbroken continuity with the deepest past. Conquest might change the names of rulers and the languages of courts, but the sacred scribes continued their eternal work of recording and preserving. Through Persian invasions and Greek conquests, through Roman occupation and Byzantine transformation, the essential traditions endured. The temple at Sais held particular significance in this vast network of memory. Dedicated to Neith, the ancient goddess of wisdom and war, it served as a repository for the most precious records. Here, carved into pillars of stone that would outlast empires, were preserved the chronicles of the earliest days when gods walked among mortals and the world was young. When Solon arrived at Sais during his decade of travel, the priests received him with the respect due to a foreign lawgiver, but also with the gentle condescension of teachers addressing a promising but ignorant student. Greece, for all its growing reputation for wisdom and culture, remained a newcomer to the community of civilized nations. Its oldest stories were recent news compared to the histories preserved in Egyptian temples. The conversation that would eventually reach Plato began with Solon's attempt to impress his hosts with Greek antiquity. He recited the genealogies of ancient heroes, told tales of prehistoric kings, and shared the oldest traditions preserved in Athenian memory. The priests listened politely, but their smiles carried the patience of those who had heard such stories countless times from countless visitors. "Your flood," one priest remarked when Solon finished his account of Deucalion's deluge, "was neither the first nor the greatest. There have been many destructions of mankind in the past, and there will be many more in the future. Some come by fire, others by water, but the greatest and most terrible are caused by the corruption of human hearts." Then they began to tell stories that made Greek mythology seem like children's tales. They spoke of civilizations that had achieved wonders beyond Greek imagination, of technologies that surpassed anything known in contemporary times, of empires that had spanned continents and ruled the seas. And they told of how these mighty achievements had crumbled when their creators forgot the source of their power. The most remarkable of these accounts concerned an island empire that had existed 9,000 years before Solon's birth. Located beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Western Ocean, this civilization had achieved heights of power and knowledge that made contemporary empires seem insignificant. Its people had possessed technologies that bordered on the miraculous, social systems that created unprecedented prosperity, and military might that conquered half the known world. But the priests spoke of this empire, which they called Atlantis, not with admiration but with sorrow tinged by divine warning. The Atlanteans had begun as children of the gods, with wisdom and power beyond mortal limits. Their early rulers had governed with justice that created a golden age of peace and prosperity. Their scientists had unlocked secrets of nature that later generations would struggle to rediscover. Yet this very success had planted the seeds of their destruction. As generations passed and divine blood thinned in their veins, the Atlanteans had forgotten gratitude and embraced arrogance. They had begun to see their blessings as entitlements, their power as proof of superiority over other peoples. The empire that had once protected and enlightened the world had become a threat to everything good and free. The final confrontation had come when Atlantean armies pressed eastward toward Egypt and Greece. Only one city had dared to resist their seemingly irresistible advance: prehistoric Athens, fighting not for conquest, but for the simple right to remain free. Against all odds, the Athenians had stopped the Atlantean war machine and demonstrated that tyranny, however powerful, could not defeat courage guided by justice. But the ultimate victory had belonged to the gods themselves. Zeus, seeing what the descendants of Poseidon had become, had pronounced judgment on the corruption that threatened to engulf the world. In a single day and night, earthquakes and floods had erased the mightiest civilization in human history so completely that later generations would question whether it had ever existed. The priests showed Solon the pillars where this history was recorded, the hieroglyphs that preserved every detail of the great catastrophe. They explained how Egyptian records had survived when all other accounts had vanished, protected by the dry climate and stable traditions that made the Nile Valley a reservoir of human memory. What had been lost everywhere else remained alive in the sacred archives of Sais. Solon spent months in the temple, learning the ancient script and studying records that reached back to the very beginning of civilization. The priests taught him not just the facts of ancient history, but the patterns they revealed. Civilizations rose through virtue and wisdom, achieved greatness through divine favor, then fell through pride and corruption. The cycle had repeated countless times and would continue as long as humans possessed both the capacity for nobility and the weakness for evil. When Solon finally departed Egypt, he carried with him more than just historical knowledge. He bore responsibility for preserving memories that might otherwise vanish from human consciousness. The priests had entrusted him with accounts that survived nowhere else, making him a link in the chain of transmission that connected contemporary Greece with the deepest past. Back in Athens, Solon shared what he had learned with family and close friends. The story of Atlantis particularly captured imaginations, though it seemed almost too fantastic to believe. An island empire larger than Asia and Africa combined, technologies that surpassed anything known to contemporary civilizations, a catastrophe so complete that an entire continent had vanished beneath the waves. But Solon's reputation for truthfulness and careful judgment lent credibility to even the most extraordinary claims. He was not given to wild tales or philosophical speculation. His interests lay in practical governance and legal reform, not romantic fantasies about lost civilizations. If he believed the Egyptian accounts, perhaps there was more truth in them than immediate appearances suggested. The knowledge passed from Solon to his descendants, preserved in family traditions that valued historical accuracy over dramatic effect. Critias the Elder received it from his grandfather and transmitted it to his own grandson, the Critias, who would eventually share it with Plato. Through 3 generations of careful preservation, the account maintained its essential details while accumulating the minor variations inevitable in oral transmission. By the time the story reached Plato, it had become something more than mere historical record. It carried the weight of ancient wisdom about the rise and fall of civilizations, the relationship between power and responsibility, and the eternal struggle between justice and corruption. The Egyptian priests had not simply preserved facts, but had maintained a mirror in which every age could see its own reflection. Whether the priests of Sais truly possessed such ancient records, or whether they had created elaborate teaching stories, matters less than the profound truths their accounts contained. They understood that human memory is fragile, that civilizations forget their origins and repeat their mistakes, that wisdom requires constant vigilance against the corruption that success inevitably brings. The Egyptian priests served as humanity's memory keepers, preserving not just facts, but the patterns that give facts meaning. In their careful preservation of the Atlantis account, they maintained a warning that transcended any single historical event. They kept alive the knowledge that no civilization, however mighty, stands beyond the reach of cosmic justice. They remembered that divine favor once lost cannot be easily regained. Their gift to Solon, and through him to all subsequent generations, was more precious than gold or precious stones. They offered the wisdom of ages, distilled from rise and fall of countless civilizations into stories that captured eternal truths about human nature. Whether Atlantis was historical fact or symbolic teaching mattered less than the lesson it preserved. That power without wisdom leads to destruction, that pride comes before the fall, and that the gods still watch over human affairs with eyes that see beyond the surface of events. In the temple chambers of Sais, where sunlight filtered through stone windows and scribes continued their eternal work of recording and preserving, the memory of Atlantis waited for the day when the world would need its warning once again. The priests knew that every civilization believes itself permanent, every empire imagines itself eternal, every generation thinks it has finally learned the lessons of history. But they also knew that memory fades, wisdom is forgotten, and the cycle always begins anew. The Atlantis story survived because the Egyptian priests understood a fundamental truth about human nature. We learn best through stories that touch our hearts as well as our minds. Facts fade from memory, but narratives that carry emotional truth remain alive across centuries. In preserving the account of Atlantis, the priests ensured that the deepest lessons about power and responsibility would never be entirely lost, no matter how often they might be forgotten. Other flood legends, a global pattern. Across the world, in cultures that never knew each other existed, the same story appears again and again. The details change with telling, the names shift with language, but the core remains constant. There was a time when divine wrath cleansed the earth with water, when the sins of humanity called down destruction from the heavens, when only the righteous survived to begin the world anew. In the cedar forests of ancient Mesopotamia, where civilization first learned to write and build cities, poets sang of Utnapishtim and the Great Deluge. The gods, disturbed by human wickedness and noise, decided to wash the earth clean with floods that covered even the highest mountains. Only one man, warned by divine mercy, built a great vessel and saved representatives of all living creatures from the waters that destroyed everything else. The tale was old when Babylon was young, carved into clay tablets that preserved every detail of divine wrath and human salvation. Utnapishtim's ark grounded on Mount Nisir after the floods receded, and he sent forth birds to test whether the earth was ready for life again. When the dove returned with an olive branch, the survivor knew that divine anger had passed and the world could begin anew. Far to the south, along the sacred Nile, where time itself seemed measured in the rise and fall of annual floods, Egyptian scribes recorded their own version of cosmic cleansing. Ra, the sun god, grew weary of human rebellion and sent Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, to destroy the corrupt generation. But her fury proved so terrible that Ra himself relented, flooding the earth with beer dyed red like blood to make the goddess drunk and end her rampage. In the fertile valleys of India, where the Vedic hymns first captured divine truth in human language, sages told of Manu and the great fish. As corruption spread across the earth and Dharma weakened, Vishnu appeared as a massive fish to save the righteous Manu from the flood that would cleanse the world. The fish towed Manu's vessel through the rising waters until they reached the safety of a mountain peak, where the ancestor of the new human race waited for the waters to recede. These stories shared more than just flood motifs. They revealed a common understanding of divine justice that operated according to moral laws as fixed as the movements of stars. When human behavior became intolerable to the cosmic order, correction followed as inevitably as dawn follows darkness. The mechanism might vary, sometimes flood, sometimes fire, sometimes plague, but the principle remained constant. Even in the vast forests of North America, where tribal peoples preserved oral traditions that stretched back to the very beginning of memory, the flood story appeared in forms that echoed their distant cousins across oceans. The Cherokee spoke of a great deluge that covered all the land except the highest mountain peaks, where animals and a few humans took refuge until the waters subsided. The Ojibwe told of Nanabojo, who survived the flood on a great raft and recreated the world with the help of a diving muskrat who brought up earth from beneath the waters. In the high mountains of South America, where the Inca built an empire that touched the clouds, chroniclers recorded ancient traditions about Viracocha and the cleansing flood. The creator god, angered by the wickedness of the first human race, destroyed them with water that covered even the highest peaks. Only 2 people survived to become the ancestors of a better generation, guided by divine wisdom to avoid the mistakes of their predecessors. The Greek tradition, preserved in the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha, followed the same essential pattern. Zeus, disturbed by human corruption, sent a great flood to cleanse the earth. Only the righteous Deucalion and his wife survived, warned by Prometheus to build an ark. When the waters receded, they repopulated the world by throwing stones over their shoulders, which became the first people of the New Age. Even the biblical account of Noah fits seamlessly into this global pattern. God, grieved by human wickedness, decided to destroy the corrupt world with floodwaters. Only Noah and his family were saved, along with representatives of all animal species. The ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and Noah sent forth birds to test for dry land. When the dove returned with an olive branch, the patriarch knew that divine judgment had passed and life could begin again. The similarities were too numerous and too specific to be coincidental. Cultures that had no contact with each other independently preserved accounts of world-destroying floods, righteous survivors, divine warnings, and animal-saving arcs. The details varied, but the core narrative remained remarkably consistent across vast distances of space and time. Some scholars suggested that these traditions preserved genuine memories of catastrophic flooding in humanity's distant past. The end of the last ice age had brought massive changes to global water levels. As glaciers melted, vast areas of previously inhabited land disappeared beneath rising seas. Perhaps the flood legends preserved folk memories of these very real disasters that had shaped human history. The Black Sea deluge theory offered one specific mechanism for such memories. Archaeological evidence suggested that around 5600 BCE, the Mediterranean had broken through the Bosphorus, transforming a freshwater lake into the saltwater Black Sea and flooding vast areas of inhabited land. Survivors of this catastrophe might have carried flood stories with them as they migrated to new homes, spreading the narrative across cultures and continents. But the global flood traditions shared elements that went beyond simple disaster narratives. They consistently portrayed the floods as divine judgment on moral corruption, rather than random natural catastrophes. The survivors were saved not by luck or superior technology, but by righteousness that made them worthy of divine protection. The flood served to cleanse the world morally as well as physically, creating opportunities for better civilizations to arise. This moral dimension suggested that the flood legends functioned as more than historical records. They served as teaching tools that preserved essential insights about the relationship between human behavior and cosmic justice. In cultures around the world, these stories reminded each generation that actions have consequences, that corruption invites destruction, and that survival depends on maintaining harmony with divine will. The Atlantis account fit perfectly into this global pattern. Like Utnapishtim, Manu, and Noah, the Atlanteans faced destruction because of moral corruption rather than random misfortune. Like the biblical flood, the Atlantean catastrophe served divine justice that operated according to eternal principles. Like all the flood traditions, the Atlantis story preserved warnings about the consequences of hubris and the importance of remaining humble before the gods. But Atlantis differed from other flood legends in significant ways. While most traditions focused on primitive peoples destroyed by simple corruption, the Atlantean account described an advanced civilization that possessed sophisticated technology and complex social institutions. The Atlanteans weren't crude barbarians whose wickedness was obvious to all, but sophisticated people whose corruption was subtle and gradual. This difference made the Atlantis story particularly relevant to advanced civilizations that might otherwise dismiss flood legends as warnings meant for simpler peoples. The Atlanteans had achieved everything that later civilizations would aspire to: technological mastery, economic prosperity, military dominance, and cultural sophistication. Yet these very achievements had become sources of pride that led to their ultimate destruction. The global pattern of flood legends suggested that the Atlantis account, whether historically accurate or not, preserved universal truths about human nature and divine justice. Cultures around the world had independently recognized that civilizations, like individuals, could become so corrupted that destruction became necessary for the greater good. The flood motif appeared again and again because it captured something essential about the relationship between moral order and physical survival. Perhaps the Egyptian priests who told Solon about Atlantis were preserving not just Greek prehistory, but a version of the universal flood tradition adapted to contemporary needs. Advanced civilizations required sophisticated warnings about sophisticated dangers. The simple flood legends of primitive peoples might not speak clearly to cultures that had mastered technology and built empires. But the story of Atlantis offered a flood legend calibrated for civilized audiences, showing that even the mightiest achievements could not protect against the consequences of moral failure. In this reading, Atlantis became the ultimate flood legend, the story that carried ancient wisdom about divine justice into an age when humans had begun to imagine themselves equal to the gods. Whether the priests had preserved genuine historical records or had crafted elaborate teaching stories mattered less than their success in creating a narrative that would carry eternal truths across centuries of changing circumstances. The global pattern of flood legends ensured that the Atlantis story would resonate with audiences from every culture and tradition. Whether listeners trace their heritage to Mesopotamian cities, Egyptian dynasties, Indian kingdoms, or tribal peoples from distant continents, they would recognize in Atlantis echoes of their own ancestral memories about divine judgment and human renewal. The flood had become humanity's shared metaphor for the ultimate consequences of moral failure, and Atlantis stood as the most sophisticated expression of this universal theme. The search begins, medieval curiosity. In the quiet halls of medieval monasteries where candlelight danced across ancient texts, scholars began to whisper about sunken cities. The world had grown smaller, yet somehow more mysterious. Maps showed blank spaces where dragons might dwell, and learned men wondered what truths lay hidden in Plato's strange tale. Medieval minds worked differently than ours. They saw the world as layered with meaning, where every story held deeper truths. When monks copied Plato's dialogues by hand, letter by careful letter, they paused at the Atlantis passages. Some dismissed it as mere philosophy. Others felt something stir in their hearts. The great Islamic scholars preserved what Europe had nearly lost. In Baghdad and Cordoba, Arabic translations kept Plato's words alive. Ibn Sina, known to the West as Avicenna, pondered whether such a place could have existed. The story traveled along trade routes, mixing with other tales of lost kingdoms beneath the waves. Byzantine scholars debated Atlantis in Constantinople's great libraries. They compared it to their own empire's glory, wondering if they too might one day sink beneath history's tide. The parallels felt uncomfortably close: power, pride, and the gods' displeasure. These themes echoed through their own troubled times. Medieval maps began to show mysterious islands in the Atlantic. Cartographers drew them with uncertain hands, placing them where sailors claimed to have seen land that later vanished. The Fortunate Isles, the island of the Seven Cities, lands that appeared and disappeared like mirages. Perhaps one of these was Plato's lost realm. Thomas Aquinas mentioned Atlantis briefly, treating it as Aristotle had, a useful fiction. But other thinkers felt differently. They saw Noah's flood, they saw divine punishment, they saw patterns that matched their Christian worldview. A great civilization destroyed for its sins. This made perfect sense. The Crusades brought new stories from the East. Returning knights spoke of ancient ruins, of cities claimed by desert sands or swallowed by earthquakes. The world suddenly seemed full of lost places. If Jerusalem could be reclaimed, why not Atlantis? In the monasteries of Ireland, where learning survived the dark centuries, monks preserved older tales. They wrote of High Brasil, the phantom island that appeared every 7 years off Ireland's coast. Celtic legends mixed with Platonic philosophy, creating new versions of the sunken city story. The medieval mind craved order, hierarchy, meaning. Atlantis fit their vision of history as moral instruction. God raised up nations and cast them down according to his judgment. The Atlantic held its secrets, but those secrets taught clear lessons about human pride and divine justice. The Age of Discovery, Atlantis resurfaces. The year 1492 changed everything. Columbus returned from his voyage with tales that set Europe ablaze with wonder. A new world existed, vast, populated, entirely unknown to the ancients. Suddenly, Plato's story seemed less impossible and more like prophecy. Spanish conquistadors found golden cities in the Americas. They discovered advanced civilizations with massive temples, intricate canals, and knowledge that rivaled the old world. Could these be descendants of Atlantis? The timing seemed perfect. Plato had said Atlantis existed 9,000 years before his time, and here were peoples with no memory of the old world. Francisco López de Gomara, chronicler of the conquest, made the connection explicit. The Americas, he declared, were Plato's Atlantis. The Atlantic Ocean had separated these lands from Europe, just as Plato described. The indigenous peoples were the survivors, their ancestors having escaped the great catastrophe. Other scholars pushed back. They pointed out that Plato had clearly stated Atlantis sank beneath the waves, while the Americas remained very much above sea level. But the discovery fever was too strong. Every new island, every unexplored coast might hold the key to the ancient mystery. Portuguese navigators found the Azores in the mid-Atlantic, exactly where many expected Atlantis to be. These volcanic islands seemed to rise from tremendous depths, as if they were mountain peaks of a sunken continent. Local legends spoke of larger lands that once connected the scattered isles. French explorers sailing to Canada brought back stories of indigenous flood myths. The Algonquin spoke of a great deluge that reshaped the world. Similar tales emerged from every corner of the Americas. Were these distant memories of Atlantis' destruction preserved in oral tradition across vast spans of time? The Protestant Reformation added new energy to Atlantis research. Scholars no longer bound by Catholic orthodoxy felt free to explore radical ideas. If the Church had been wrong about the cosmos, perhaps it had been wrong about ancient history too. The discovery of America proved that authoritative sources could miss entire continents. Maps proliferated with imaginary islands. The Atlantic became crowded with cartographers' hopes and sailors' tales. Antillia, the island of the seven cities, appeared on chart after chart. Brazil Rock, marked in various locations, gave its name to the future Portuguese colony. Each phantom landmass might be the remnant Plato described. Mercator, the great mapmaker, placed Atlantis firmly in his world atlas. He drew it as a large island near the American coast, basing his decision on careful study of ancient sources and modern discoveries. For many Europeans, this settled the matter. Atlantis had been found. It was America itself. The Age of Discovery transformed Atlantis from philosophical allegory into geographical possibility. The ocean that had once seemed impossibly vast now teemed with new lands. If Columbus could stumble upon an entire hemisphere, perhaps Atlantis waited just beyond the next horizon. Atlantis and the Azores, a tempting location. 9 volcanic islands rise from the Atlantic's depths, exactly where medieval maps placed mysterious lands. The Azores emerged from Portuguese exploration like ancient dreams made real. Their position, their geology, their very existence seemed to whisper of deeper truths. Sailors approaching the Azores saw them appear from ocean mists like phantom realms. The island's steep cliffs and volcanic peaks suggested massive foundations hidden beneath the waves. Local fishermen told stories their grandfathers had passed down, tales of larger lands that once connected the scattered archipelago. Portuguese chroniclers noted something remarkable about the Azores. Despite lying hundreds of miles from any continent, the islands showed signs of human presence before Portuguese arrival. Stone structures dotted the landscape, their builders unknown. Ancient coins surfaced in farmers' fields, bearing unfamiliar symbols. The mystery deepened with each discovery. The geography matched Plato's description in tantalizing ways. He had written of Atlantis lying beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic proper. The Azores sat precisely in that position, roughly halfway between Europe and America. Their volcanic nature suggested dramatic geological activity, the kind that might sink continents. Azorean folklore preserved memories that scholars found intriguing. Islanders spoke of Sete Cidades, the 7 cities, supposedly founded by 7 bishops fleeing the Moorish conquest of Iberia. But older stories hinted at earlier inhabitants, a people who built in stone and knew the sea's secrets before vanishing into legend. The island's volcanic activity provided a mechanism for Atlantis' destruction. Regular earthquakes shook the Azores, reminding inhabitants of the Earth's restless power. In 1522, a massive eruption created a new island that survived for several years before sinking back beneath the waves. If such events happened recently, what might have occurred in ancient times? Natural historians noted the Azores' unique flora and fauna. Some species existed nowhere else on Earth, suggesting long isolation. Yet, other plants and animals showed relationships with both European and American varieties. Had the islands once formed part of a land bridge spanning the Atlantic? The island of Terceira yielded the most intriguing evidence. Farmers regularly unearthed worked stones that seemed to form foundations of unknown buildings. These structures showed sophisticated engineering, with perfectly fitted blocks and complex drainage systems. Who had built them and when? Portuguese colonists discovered something else remarkable. The soil of several islands was extraordinarily fertile, as if enriched by some ancient process. Crops grew with unusual vigor, and the islands supported larger populations than their size suggested possible. This abundance echoed Plato's descriptions of Atlantis' agricultural wealth. The Azores offered more than geographical correspondence. They provided a living laboratory for understanding how advanced civilizations might vanish. The island's history of volcanic destruction and renewal suggested how quickly sophisticated societies could disappear beneath the waves, leaving only scattered remnants and fading memories. Atlantis in the Atlantic, a sea of theories. The 19th century embraced grand theories with Victorian confidence. Scholars armed with new geological knowledge gazed across the Atlantic and saw not an empty ocean, but the grave of continents. The sea floor held secrets that steam-age science was finally ready to decode. Ocean soundings revealed something astonishing. The Atlantic's floor was not a smooth, featureless plain, but a landscape of mountains and valleys rivaling any on land. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, that great underwater mountain range, suggested dramatic geological upheavals in the distant past. Perhaps continents had indeed risen and fallen where only water now remained. British geologists studying both sides of the Atlantic noticed remarkable similarities. The rocks of Ireland matched formations in Newfoundland. African coastlines seemed to fit against South American shores like puzzle pieces. Could these continents once have been joined? And if so, what lands might have existed in the spaces between? The new science of paleontology added weight to these speculations. Identical fossils appeared on opposite sides of the Atlantic, creatures that could never have swum such distances. Either these continents had been connected, or other lands had served as stepping stones for ancient life. Atlantis suddenly seemed less mythical and more geological. Charles Lyell, the great uniformitarian geologist, remained skeptical. His careful study of geological processes suggested that continents were relatively stable features. But even Lyell acknowledged that dramatic changes had occurred in the Earth's past. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, massive floods, the Earth's history was written in catastrophe. The telegraph cables laid across the Atlantic floor provided new data about ocean depths. Cable-laying ships discovered an underwater plateau that seemed to extend from Europe toward America. Telegraph engineers dubbed it the Dolphin Ridge, but romantic minds saw something more: the spine of a sunken continent. Marine biology offered tantalizing clues. Deep-sea fishing revealed creatures that seemed like living fossils, unchanged from ancient times. These primitive fish lived at depths where sunlight never reached, as if preserving memories of when their ancestors swam in shallow seas above lost lands. Oceanographers mapped currents and found patterns that suggested obstacles no longer visible. The Gulf Stream's path seemed to wind around invisible barriers, as if the sea still remembered lands that once divided its flow. Could these phantom obstructions be the remnants of Atlantis? The discovery of the Sargasso Sea added another layer to Atlantic mysteries. This vast region of floating seaweed created a unique ecosystem in the ocean's heart. Early explorers feared it as a ship trap, but scientists saw something more intriguing: evidence of unusual conditions that might mark ancient catastrophes. Volcanic activity throughout the Atlantic region provided mechanisms for continental destruction. Iceland's explosive eruptions, the Azores, and continuing seismic activity, the volcanic peaks that dotted the ocean all suggested a geologically active region where massive changes remained possible. The centuries' growing knowledge of geology made Atlantis seem not just possible, but probable. If mountains could rise from seafloors and ice could cover continents, why not lost civilizations beneath the waves? The Atlantic had become a stage where the greatest dramas of Earth's history might have played out. The rise of pseudoarchaeology. Something changed in the late 1800s. Archaeological discoveries were revolutionizing human understanding of the past, but not everyone was satisfied with careful, methodical scholarship. A new breed of theorist emerged: enthusiastic amateurs who saw patterns the experts missed and connections the universities ignored. Heinrich Schliemann had shown that amateur passion could triumph over academic skepticism. His discovery of Troy proved that ancient legends might contain literal truth. If Homer's epic preserved memories of real cities, why not Plato's dialogues? The barrier between myth and history began to crumble. Popular magazines hungry for sensational stories embraced speculative archaeology. They published articles about lost civilizations, mysterious ruins, and ancient technologies that modern science could barely comprehend. Atlantis featured prominently in these tales, no longer confined to dusty classical texts, but alive in contemporary imagination. The spiritualist movement added new dimensions to Atlantis research. Mediums claimed to contact spirits from the sunken continent, receiving detailed descriptions of daily life in the lost civilization. These psychic revelations filled gaps that conventional archaeology couldn't address, providing rich narratives about Atlantean religion, technology, and social organization. Photography and improved printing allowed wider distribution of archaeological discoveries. Images of Mayan pyramids, Easter Island statues, and Egyptian temples reached audiences who had never left their home countries. The world seemed full of inexplicable monuments built by unknown hands. Perhaps all were connected to a common source: Atlantis. The theory of evolution, while revolutionary in biology, created confusion about human development. If species evolved gradually, how did ancient peoples build structures that modern engineers found challenging? Some theorists propose that earlier civilizations had achieved heights that subsequent humanity forgot. Atlantis became the explanation for inconvenient sophistication. Amateur archaeologists began finding proof of Atlantis in unexpected places. They identified Atlantean symbolism in Mayan art, Atlantean influence in Egyptian architecture, Atlantean colonies scattered across the globe. Every ancient mystery became evidence of the mother civilization's far-reaching influence. The new field of comparative mythology provided additional support for Atlantis theories. Scholars noted that flood legends appeared in cultures worldwide, often featuring remarkably similar details. Rather than seeing these as universal human responses to natural disasters, Atlantis enthusiasts interpreted them as corrupted memories of a single catastrophic event. Academic archaeology, growing more professional and scientific, began to distance itself from speculative theories. Universities demanded evidence, documentation, careful analysis. But popular interest in Atlantis only grew stronger in response to scholarly skepticism. The more experts dismissed the lost continent, the more attractive it became to independent researchers. Alternative historians argued that conventional archaeology was blinded by its own assumptions. They claimed that evidence of advanced ancient civilizations was being ignored or suppressed because it didn't fit accepted models of human development. Atlantis became a symbol of hidden truths that only free-thinking investigators could uncover. The rise of pseudoarchaeology transformed Atlantis from classical curiosity into modern obsession. No longer bound by Plato's specific details, the lost continent evolved into whatever theorists needed it to be. Source of all civilization, repository of ancient wisdom, or proof that human history was far stranger than mainstream science admitted. Ignatius Donnelly, the Prophet of Atlantis. In 1882, a book appeared that would reshape how the world thought about lost civilizations. Atlantis, the antediluvian world, emerged from the mind of Ignatius Donnelly, a failed politician turned passionate researcher who saw connections where others saw coincidence. Donnelly was no ordinary theorist. He had served in Congress, debated national issues, and understood how to craft compelling arguments. When personal setbacks ended his political career, he turned his persuasive talents toward ancient mysteries. Atlantis became his crusade, his chance to revolutionize human understanding of the past. The book was massive, over 400 pages of carefully marshaled evidence, comparative analysis, and bold conclusions. Donnelly didn't simply retell Plato's story. He wove together archaeology, linguistics, mythology, and geology into a grand narrative that placed Atlantis at the center of human civilization. His central thesis was breathtaking in scope. Atlantis, Donnelly argued, was the original source of all human culture. From this advanced island civilization, colonists had spread across the globe, establishing the great early societies of Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and the Americas. Every achievement of ancient humanity could be traced back to Atlantean origins. The evidence Donnelly presented seemed overwhelming. He cataloged similarities between Old and New World cultures that conventional history couldn't explain. Both sides of the Atlantic had built pyramids, developed sophisticated astronomy, practiced mummification, and worshipped similar deities. Only a common source could account for such parallels. Linguistic analysis formed another pillar of Donnelly's argument. He found words and place names that seemed to echo across continents, suggesting ancient connections between cultures that supposedly had no contact. The very name Atlantic preserved memory of the vanished island, while countless rivers, cities, and regions bore variations of Atlantis. Geological evidence strengthened his case. The discovery of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge provided a mechanism for Atlantis's existence and destruction. This underwater mountain range, Donnelly suggested, was the backbone of the sunken continent. Volcanic activity could have raised it above sea level in ancient times, then destroyed it in a single catastrophic event. Flood legends from around the world took on new significance in Donnelly's interpretation. Rather than seeing these as separate cultural developments, he presented them as corrupted memories of Atlantis's destruction. The biblical flood, Mesopotamian deluge myths, and Native American inundation stories all preserved fragments of the same historical event. The book's impact was immediate and enormous. It became a bestseller, translated into multiple languages, and discussed in drawing rooms across America and Europe. Donnelly had given Atlantis research scientific respectability and popular appeal. He transformed Plato's philosophical allegory into a comprehensive theory of human origins. Critics attacked Donnelly's methods and conclusions. Professional archaeologists pointed out factual errors, linguistic fallacies, and logical gaps in his arguments. But the criticism only enhanced the book's appeal to readers suspicious of academic authority. Donnelly appeared to be a lone truth teller confronting an establishment conspiracy of silence. The book spawned countless imitators and elaborators. Donnelly had created a template for speculative history that combined genuine scholarship with imaginative leaps. His work showed how ancient mysteries could be packaged for popular consumption while maintaining an appearance of scientific rigor. Atlantis, the antediluvian world, became the foundational text of modern Atlantis research. It established the methodology, arguments, and tone that would characterize the field for generations. Donnelly had transformed himself from failed politician into the prophet of Atlantis, and his vision would outlive every other aspect of his career. Atlantis and the Lost Continents, Lemuria, and Mu. The success of Donnelly's Atlantis theory opened floodgates. If one advanced civilization could vanish beneath the waves, why not others? The 19th century's appetite for spectacular discoveries and grand theories gave birth to an entire family of lost continents, each more mysterious than the last. Lemuria emerged from scientific necessity before evolving into mystical speculation. Zoologists studying lemur distribution noticed these primitive primates lived in Madagascar and India, but nowhere between. Philip Sclater proposed that a land bridge once connected these regions, a continent he named Lemuria after its supposed inhabitants. The theory gained scientific support when geologists found similar rock formations in India, Madagascar, and parts of Africa. Continental drift was still unknown, so a sunken continent seemed the logical explanation. Lemuria began as sober scientific hypothesis, but it wouldn't remain that way for long. Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical movement, seized upon Lemuria as the missing piece in her spiritual cosmology. In The Secret Doctrine, she described Lemuria as home to the third root race of humanity, spiritual beings who lived millions of years ago, before matter became as dense as it is today. Blavatsky's Lemuria was vast, stretching across much of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Its inhabitants were giants who communicated telepathically and possessed powers that modern humans had lost, built great cities and achieved harmony between spiritual and material worlds before cosmic cycles brought their era to an end. The discovery of Easter Island added fuel to lost continent theories. How had ancient peoples transported massive stone statues to this remote Pacific outpost? The island's isolation seemed to demand explanation, and a sunken continent filled with ancient cities provided one. Perhaps Easter Island was merely the surviving peak of Greater Lemuria. Colonel James Churchward introduced yet another lost continent, Mu, which he claimed was the true cradle of civilization. According to Churchward, Mu had occupied much of the Pacific before sinking 12,000 years ago. Its destruction scattered survivors across the globe, establishing colonies that became the world's first civilizations. Churchward's evidence came from mysterious tablets he claimed to have discovered in India, written in a language only he could read. These tablets told Mu's complete history, from its founding by the Nacals, the Holy Brothers, to its final destruction by volcanic catastrophe. The civilization had achieved technological marvels that surpassed modern capabilities. The lost continents began to interact in increasingly complex ways. Some theorists propose that Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu had existed simultaneously, trading with each other across vast oceanic distances. Wars between these continents explained geological catastrophes, while their peaceful exchanges accounted for cultural similarities worldwide. Each lost continent attracted its own following. Atlantis appealed to those fascinated by classical antiquity and European origins. Lemuria drew spiritually minded seekers interested in humanity's psychic evolution. Mu captured imaginations focused on Pacific mysteries and alternative technologies. The continents also began to multiply. Scholars proposed Hyperborea in the Arctic, Kumari Kandam in the Indian Ocean, and various other landmasses wherever geographical puzzles needed explanation. The world's oceans became crowded with sunken civilizations, each more advanced than recorded history suggested possible. Scientific advances gradually undermined the geological basis for lost continents. Continental drift explained fossil distributions without requiring land bridges. Ocean floor mapping showed no evidence of sunken landmasses where theory demanded them. But by then, the lost continents had transcended scientific origins to become spiritual and cultural phenomena. The multiplication of lost continents revealed something important about human psychology. The discovery that the Earth was older and stranger than previously imagined created space for unlimited speculation. If conventional history covered only the tiniest fraction of human existence, perhaps anything was possible in those vast unknown eras. Atlantis and Ancient Aliens, a modern twist. The 20th century brought new mysteries that demanded new explanations. Archaeological discoveries revealed ancient achievements that seemed to surpass the capabilities of primitive peoples. How had Stone Age builders moved massive blocks with perfect precision? How had ancient astronomers calculated planetary movements without modern instruments? Perhaps the answer lay not beneath the earth, but beyond the sky. The idea began innocently enough. Researchers noted curious details in ancient art and literature that seemed to describe flying vehicles, weapons of unusual power, and beings who descended from heaven. Hindu epics described vimanas, flying chariots that soared through clouds and launched devastating weapons. Biblical texts spoke of Ezekiel's wheel and fiery chariots carrying divine messengers. Charles Fort, collector of anomalies and mysteries, suggested that unusual archaeological finds might indicate extraterrestrial contact. His catalogs of strange phenomena included reports of ancient artifacts in impossible locations, mysterious objects in historical artwork, and accounts of aerial phenomena from centuries past. Perhaps human civilization had received outside assistance. The UFO era that began in the 1940s provided new context for ancient mysteries. If alien spacecraft were visiting Earth in modern times, why not in the past? Kenneth Arnold's flying saucer sighting and the Roswell incident created a cultural framework for interpreting historical anomalies as evidence of extraterrestrial intervention. Atlantis found its place in this emerging narrative as the prime example of ancient alien contact. The lost continent's supposed advanced technology and sudden disappearance made perfect sense if extraterrestrial visitors had established a base there. When cosmic politics or natural cycles ended their mission, they departed, leaving human colonists to face destruction alone. Erich von Däniken crystallized these ideas in Chariots of the Gods, a best-selling book that reinterpreted archaeological mysteries as evidence of ancient astronauts. Von Däniken argued that extraterrestrial visitors had guided human evolution, established early civilizations, and left traces of their presence in monuments, artwork, and mythology worldwide. The ancient astronaut theory provided elegant solutions to stubborn historical puzzles. How had primitive humans built the pyramids? Alien technology. Why did isolated cultures develop similar symbols and stories? Common extraterrestrial teachers. What explained the sudden emergence of civilization? Extraterrestrial intervention in human development. Atlantis became the crown jewel of ancient astronaut theory. Its advanced technology reflected alien science. Its global influence showed extraterrestrial reach. Its sudden destruction demonstrated what happened when cosmic visitors departed. The lost continent was simultaneously proof of alien contact and warning about humanity's dependence on outside help. Television documentaries and popular books spread these ideas to vast audiences. The History Channel's Ancient Aliens series made extraterrestrial archaeology mainstream entertainment. Each episode found new evidence of alien intervention, and Atlantis appeared regularly as the ultimate example of advanced ancient civilization. Critics pointed out the lack of concrete evidence for extraterrestrial contact. No alien artifacts had been conclusively identified. No ancient texts clearly described space travel. No archaeological sites showed unambiguous signs of advanced technology. But believers argued that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence, especially given alleged cover-ups and suppression. The ancient alien interpretation of Atlantis reflected modern anxieties about technology and civilization. In an age of rapid technological change and environmental threat, the idea of advanced ancient civilizations destroyed by their own hubris resonated powerfully. Perhaps humanity was repeating patterns established long ago. The theory also satisfied psychological needs that conventional archaeology couldn't address. It provided simple explanations for complex mysteries, connected humanity to cosmic drama, and suggested that truth was stranger and more wonderful than mainstream science admitted. Atlantis became not just a lost civilization, but a symbol of hidden reality. The Santorini hypothesis, real catastrophes. In the Aegean Sea, layers of volcanic ash tell the story of one of history's most violent eruptions. The island of Thera, now called Santorini, exploded sometime in the Bronze Age with force that scarred the ancient world. As archaeologists uncovered evidence of this catastrophe, some began to wonder, could this be the real event behind Plato's Atlantis story? The Minoan civilization flourished on Crete during the Bronze Age, creating palaces of stunning sophistication. Knossos, Phaistos, and other centers revealed advanced architecture, beautiful art, and complex administration. Then, suddenly, this civilization declined. The timing seemed to match the Thera eruption, suggesting a connection between geological catastrophe and cultural collapse. Spiridon Marinitos, the Greek archaeologist who excavated Santorini, made the connection explicit. The volcanic explosion, he argued, had devastated Minoan civilization and inspired the Atlantis legend. The details fit remarkably well. An advanced island civilization destroyed by earthquake and flood in a single day and night. The archaeological evidence was compelling. Beneath layers of volcanic ash, excavators found a sophisticated Bronze Age city. The settlement, now called Akrotiri, showed signs of hasty abandonment. Pottery still sat on tables, food remained in storage jars, but the inhabitants had vanished before the final catastrophic eruption. The scale of destruction matched Plato's description. The Thera eruption ranks among the largest volcanic events in recorded history. It hurled ash across the eastern Mediterranean, triggered massive tsunamis, and may have caused climate disruptions felt worldwide. Such a catastrophe could easily inspire legends of divine punishment. Geological studies revealed the eruption's awesome power. The explosion hollowed out the island's center, creating the distinctive caldera that gives Santorini its current shape. Tsunamis generated by the collapse reached heights of over 100 feet along nearby coasts. The sound of the explosion may have been heard across continents. The timing seemed perfect. Radiocarbon dating suggested the eruption occurred around 1600 BCE, well within the Bronze Age when Minoan civilization was at its peak. Egyptian records from roughly this period describe plagues of darkness and strange phenomena that could reflect volcanic winter caused by atmospheric ash. Cultural connections strengthened the hypothesis. Minoan art depicted bull worship and marine themes that echoed elements in Plato's Atlantis description. The civilization's apparent peaceful nature and sophisticated technology matched the positive aspects of Atlantean society. Even the concentric harbor design appeared in Minoan port facilities. The theory gained support from oceanographic research. Core samples from the Mediterranean seafloor showed layers of volcanic ash corresponding to the Thera eruption. The distribution pattern confirmed that the explosion had affected vast areas, potentially disrupting trade networks and food production across the region. Some scholars propose that Egyptian priests, Plato's alleged sources, preserved memories of the Thera catastrophe in their records. These memories, distorted by centuries of transmission, eventually reached Solon during his visit to Egypt. Plato then adapted this historical account for his philosophical purposes, creating the Atlantis allegory. The Santorini hypothesis offered something that pure speculation couldn't: physical evidence of a real catastrophe that matched key elements of the Atlantis story. Here was actual proof that advanced Bronze Age civilizations could be destroyed by geological forces in precisely the manner Plato described. Critics pointed out significant problems with the identification. Plato had placed Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules, not in the Aegean Sea. The timeline was also wrong. Plato dated Atlantis to 9,000 years before Solon, while Thera erupted only about 1,000 years before the lawgiver's birth. Defenders of the theory argued that these discrepancies resulted from errors in transmission or deliberate changes by Plato. Ancient peoples often exaggerated dates, and geographic details could easily become confused over centuries. The core elements, an advanced island civilization destroyed by volcanic catastrophe, remained intact. The Santorini hypothesis represented a new approach to Atlantis research. Instead of seeking the lost continent in speculative locations, scholars could examine real archaeological sites and geological events. The theory grounded Atlantis studies in scientific method while preserving the story's dramatic appeal. Minoan civilization, a tangible Atlantis? When Sir Arthur Evans began excavating at Knossos in 1900, he uncovered a civilization that seemed to step directly from legend. The Minoan palaces of Crete revealed sophistication that challenged assumptions about Bronze Age capabilities. Here was a culture that built multi-story buildings, created complex drainage systems, and produced art of stunning beauty, all without apparent military emphasis. The Minoans controlled sea routes across the eastern Mediterranean from roughly 2700 to 1100 BCE. Their ships carried goods between Egypt, Anatolia, and the Greek mainland. Palace centers at Knossos, Phaistos, Mallia, and Zakros served as hubs for this maritime empire. The civilization's wealth came from trade, not conquest. Minoan society displayed features that matched elements of Plato's Atlantis. The palaces showed sophisticated engineering with running water, flush toilets, and ventilation systems that wouldn't be seen again in Europe for centuries. Storage magazines held vast quantities of grain, oil, and other goods, suggesting abundance that could support large populations. The famous frescoes of Knossos depicted a world of leisure and ceremony. Young men and women performed dangerous bull-leaping rituals, elegant courtiers participated in religious processions, and dolphins played in stylized seas. This was clearly a wealthy, confident civilization that valued art, sport, and religious display. Religious practices centered on female deities and natural forces rather than war gods. The famous snake goddess figurines suggest reverence for earth powers, while ritual vessels often took marine forms. Minoan religion seemed to emphasize fertility, renewal, and harmony with natural cycles, themes that resonated with Plato's description of early Atlantean piety. The absence of defensive walls around major Minoan sites long puzzled archaeologists. How could such wealthy centers survive without fortification? The answer seemed to lie in Minoan naval power. Like Plato's Atlanteans, the Minoans ruled the sea and drew protection from their maritime dominance rather than land fortifications. Minoan influence spread far beyond Crete. Archaeological evidence shows Minoan colonies or trading posts throughout the Aegean and eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian tomb paintings depict Minoans bringing tribute or trade goods to pharaonic courts. This widespread presence matched Plato's claims about Atlantean expansion. The civilization's sudden decline in the late Bronze Age provided the catastrophic ending that Atlantis required. Around 1450 BCE, most Minoan palaces were destroyed or abandoned. While the exact cause remains debated, the collapse was swift and dramatic, occurring within a generation or two. Linear A, the undeciphered script used by the Minoans, added to their mysterious appeal. Unlike Linear B, which was decoded as early Greek, Linear A preserved its secrets. This unknown language suggested knowledge that had been lost, wisdom that modern scholars couldn't access, precisely what Atlantis enthusiasts expected from an advanced ancient civilization. The Minoan thalassocracy, or sea empire, provided a model for how Atlantis might have functioned. Rather than controlling vast land territories, the Minoans dominated through naval power and trade networks. Their influence stretched across the Mediterranean without requiring massive armies or continental-sized territories. Gender roles in Minoan society also matched elements of Atlantis descriptions. Women appeared prominently in religious ceremonies and palace life. Some scholars suggest that Minoan society was more egalitarian than other Bronze Age cultures, with women holding significant power, a feature that would make the civilization seem remarkably advanced to later generations. The Minoans' apparent pacific nature set them apart from contemporary civilizations. While Egyptians, Hittites, and Assyrians glorified warfare, Minoan art focused on nature, ceremony, and celebration. This peaceful character matched Plato's description of Atlantis during its golden age, before military ambition corrupted the kingdom. Archaeological evidence suggested that the Minoans had achieved technological advances that were lost when their civilization collapsed. Their sophisticated hydraulic engineering, advanced metallurgy, and possible knowledge of concrete represented achievements that wouldn't be matched in the Mediterranean for centuries. The Minoan identification offered Atlantis researchers what they had long sought: a real ancient civilization that displayed the sophistication, maritime power, and catastrophic end that Plato described. While purists insisted that Atlantis was purely fictional, others found in Minoan Crete the historical kernel around which the Atlantis legend had crystallized. Atlantis in popular culture, from Disney to conspiracy. The 20th century transformed Atlantis from scholarly curiosity into global obsession. Movies, books, television shows, and video games brought the lost continent into millions of homes. What began as Plato's philosophical allegory became one of the most recognizable myths in popular culture, constantly reinvented for new audiences and new anxieties. Early cinema embraced Atlantis as the perfect backdrop for adventure and romance. Silent films like Atlantis, 1913, and later sound pictures used the lost continent to explore themes of civilization and destruction that resonated with audiences living through world wars and social upheaval. The Sunken city provided escapist fantasy while reflecting real-world fears about technological progress and cultural collapse. Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire, 2001, marked the lost continent's full integration into mainstream entertainment. The animated film combined steampunk aesthetics with environmental messages, presenting Atlantis as a cautionary tale about the misuse of advanced technology. Disney's version influenced how an entire generation visualized the lost civilization. Comic book artists found Atlantis irresistible. DC Comics created Aquaman's underwater kingdom, while Marvel developed Namor, the submariner's realm. These superhero interpretations presented Atlantis as a surviving civilization hidden beneath the waves, populated by advanced beings who viewed surface dwellers with suspicion or contempt. Science fiction writers expanded Atlantis beyond its classical boundaries. Authors like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells had established templates for Lost World adventures, and Atlantis became a favorite destination for pulp magazine heroes. The lost continent offered unlimited possibilities for strange technologies, exotic creatures, and civilizations that operated by different rules than the modern world. Television documentaries began treating Atlantis as serious historical possibility rather than pure fiction. Programs on the History Channel, Discovery, and National Geographic presented competing theories about the lost continent's location and identity. These shows used dramatic recreations, computer graphics, and expert interviews to make speculative archaeology seem scientifically credible. The internet age democratized Atlantis research and conspiracy theory development. Websites proliferated with new theories about the lost continent's location, technology, and influence on modern events. Online forums allowed enthusiasts to share discoveries, debate evidence, and develop increasingly elaborate explanations for archaeological mysteries. Video games created interactive Atlantis experiences that let players explore and inhabit the lost civilization. Games like Echo the Dolphin, Tomb Raider, and Assassin's Creed featured Atlantis as a location where players could discover ancient secrets and lost technologies. These virtual environments shaped how millions of people visualized the sunken city. New Age spirituality embraced Atlantis as a symbol of humanity's lost spiritual potential. Books and workshops promised to help people recover memories of past lives in Atlantis, access Atlantean healing techniques, or channel wisdom from the advanced civilization. The lost continent became a mirror for contemporary dissatisfaction with materialistic culture. Conspiracy theorists wove Atlantis into elaborate narratives about hidden history and suppressed knowledge. Some claimed that governments were concealing evidence of Atlantis to prevent people from learning about advanced ancient technologies. Others suggested that Atlantean survivors secretly controlled world events from behind the scenes. The rise of alternative archaeology programming turned Atlantis speculation into entertainment spectacle. Shows like Ancient Aliens and In Search Of presented fringe theories with production values that made them seem authoritative. Computer animations brought speculative reconstructions to life, creating powerful visual arguments for controversial ideas. Hollywood productions increasingly treated Atlantis as a real place rather than mythical concept. Films like The Shape of Water and various aquatic monster movies assumed audience familiarity with underwater civilizations. The lost continent had become so embedded in popular consciousness that its existence seemed almost plausible. Social media accelerated the spread of Atlantis theories and discoveries. Photographs of underwater formations, Unusual archaeological finds and satellite images that seemed to show submerged structures circulated rapidly online. The speed of information sharing meant that speculative interpretations often reached audiences before expert analysis. The popularity of lost civilization themes in entertainment reflected deeper cultural anxieties about environmental destruction and social collapse. Atlantis stories often functioned as warnings about the dangers of technological hubris, moral decay, or ecological destruction. The sunken city served as a mirror for contemporary fears about civilization's fragility. Atlantis had evolved from Plato's philosophical device into a cultural phenomenon that operated independently of its origins. The lost continent meant different things to different audiences: ancient mystery, spiritual homeland, technological paradise, or cautionary tale. Its power lay precisely in this flexibility, its ability to adapt to whatever meanings each generation needed. The transformation of Atlantis into popular culture icon demonstrated how myths evolve in modern media environments. What began as written philosophy became visual spectacle, interactive experience, and social media phenomenon. The Lost Continent's journey from ancient text to global brand showed how traditional stories adapt to new technologies and audiences. Modern Atlantis bore little resemblance to Plato's original creation, but perhaps that was always the point. The philosopher had intended his story as allegory, a flexible tool for exploring human nature and social organization. Popular culture had simply expanded that flexibility, creating countless versions of Atlantis to serve countless different purposes. Atlantis and Nazi mythology, a dark chapter. The shadows of the 1930s fell across ancient myths. Germany's new rulers needed stories to feed their hunger for greatness. They found one beneath the waves. Heinrich Himmler believed in magic. The SS leader gathered scholars, mystics, and treasure hunters under one roof. Their mission: prove that Germans descended from gods. Atlantis became their holy grail. The Ahnenerbe, Hitler's occult research wing, sent expeditions across the globe. Tibet, Iceland, the Andes. They searched for traces of the master race. Atlantis wasn't just a lost city anymore. It was the birthplace of Aryan supremacy. Hermann Wirth drew maps of impossible worlds. His Atlantis stretched from Greenland to the Sahara. Blonde giants ruled this frozen empire, he claimed. When the ice melted, they scattered across Europe. The Germans were their chosen heirs. Hans Herbiger built entire cosmologies from ice and fire. His world ice theory placed Atlantis at the center of cosmic battles. Moons crashed into Earth. Civilizations rose and fell with each celestial collision. Only the pure survived. The mythmakers worked overtime. Atlantis became Nordic. Its people grew tall and fair. They mastered flight and atomic power. When the waters came, the wisest fled north. They carried their blood to Germany. Karl Maria Willigut whispered secrets in Himmler's ear. The self-proclaimed Rasputin claimed psychic memories of ancient times. He saw Atlantean priests in flowing robes. He watched their cities burn. He remembered their final words. The search for proof consumed millions. Expeditions drained the treasury while cities burned. Teams dug through ruins in occupied territories. They measured skulls and cataloged artifacts. Everything had to fit the story. Atlantis justified horror. If Germans were gods, others were less than human. The myth gave permission for unspeakable acts. Pseudoscience became policy. Fantasy became law. The old stories couldn't survive this poison. Plato's moral tale twisted into racial doctrine. Atlantis stopped being a warning about hubris. It became proof of destiny. When the Reich fell, its scholars scattered. Some fled to South America. Others hid in plain sight. They carried their theories like hidden fire. The infection spread quietly. Today, whispers of Aryan Atlantis still echo online. New movements dress old hate in ancient clothes. They speak of lost civilizations and genetic memory, the same poison repackaged for modern times. This dark chapter reminds us why myths matter. Stories shape reality. When we twist legends to serve power, we lose their wisdom. Atlantis deserves better than this shadow. The true tragedy isn't that Atlantis never existed. It's how its memory was used to justify forgetting our shared humanity. The city sank twice, once in legend, once in shame. Atlantis and spiritual movements. Edgar Cayce's Visions, Virginia Beach, 1923. A man named Edgar Cayce lay on a simple couch. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. Then he began to speak of things he'd never learned. Cayce called himself a reluctant prophet. By day, he sold insurance and taught Sunday school. But when he slept, other voices used his mouth. They spoke of past lives and future times. They spoke of Atlantis. The sleeping prophet saw three destructions. The first came 50,000 years ago. Atlantis split into 5 islands. The second struck 28,000 years later. Only Pisidia remained. The final catastrophe sank everything in 10,700 BC. His Atlantis sparkled with impossible technology. Crystals powered flying ships. Thought moved matter. Atlanteans lived for centuries. They communed with animals and spoke to stones. Science and spirit danced as one. But power corrupted the chosen people. They split into 2 groups. The sons of the law of one served others. The sons of Belial served themselves. War erupted between light and darkness. The crystals turned into weapons. Case's followers hung on every word. He described crystal energy in stunning detail. Great stones hummed with power. They lit cities and healed bodies. They could lift mountains or level them. The prophet named names from ancient times. Rata the priest. Hepsuft the engineer. Souls who walked among the crystal temples. Many had returned in modern bodies. They carried missions from the sunken world. Technology would prove him right, Case promised. Atlantis would rise again by 1968. The western coast would shift. New lands would emerge near the Caribbean. The sleeping continent would wake. His readings created a new mythology. Atlantis became a spiritual testing ground. Souls chose to incarnate there. They came to learn balance between material and divine. Most failed the test. The failure still echoes, Casey taught. Atlantean souls keep returning. They carry the same temptations. Power without wisdom. Technology without love. The pattern repeats until they learn. Thousands embraced these visions. The Association for Research and Enlightenment grew around his words. Members' past life regressed to crystal cities. They remembered being Atlantean priests and engineers. Science couldn't validate the specifics. No continent sank 12,000 years ago. No crystals powered ancient aircraft. But believers didn't need proof. They had faith. Case's Atlantis offered hope disguised as history. Humanity wasn't falling, it was returning. We'd been greater once, we could be great again. The sleeping god would wake. New Age movements adopted his vision wholesale. Crystals became sacred tools. Atlantis became the lost golden age. Spiritual seekers claimed Atlantean ancestry. They gathered at conventions and healing circles. The prophecies keep evolving. When 1968 passed quietly, new dates emerged. Atlantis would rise in 2012, then 2020, then always tomorrow. Hope needs no calendar. Modern channelers continue Casey's work. They contact Atlantean masters through meditation. They retrieve crystal technology through dreams. They promise the same awakening he foresaw. Some find comfort in these stories. They offer meaning in chaos, purpose in pain. The idea that we're ancient souls completing cosmic homework appeals to many hearts. Case's Atlantis lives in the space between science and faith. It can't be proven or disproven. It exists wherever people need to believe that humanity has higher purpose. That loss can become return, that the sunken always rises again. The ongoing hunt, submerged ruins and false starts. The cameras rolled underwater. Divers descended toward geometric shapes on the ocean floor. Excitement crackled through the research vessel. Could this be it? Could this be Atlantis? Robert Sarmast believed he'd found Plato's city off the coast of Cyprus. Sonar revealed walls and foundations. The depth matched ancient shorelines. Everything aligned with the philosopher's descriptions. Media attention exploded worldwide. Underwater archaeologists arrived with careful eyes. They measured the formations, they took samples, they studied the geology. The walls were natural rock ledges. The foundations were sand deposits. Another dream dissolved in salt water. This pattern repeats endlessly. Someone spots regular shapes beneath the waves. The internet buzzes with discovery claims. Documentaries promise revelation. Then science arrives with gentle corrections. The Bimini Road captured imaginations in 1968. Limestone blocks stretched across the seafloor near the Bahamas. They seemed too straight to be natural. Too organized for coincidence. Edgar Casey's followers celebrated vindication. Marine geologists studied the formation carefully. The blocks were beach rock, limestone that forms naturally in shallow water. Tidal forces arranged them in straight lines. Time and erosion did the rest. No human hands shaped these stones. Google Earth democratized the hunt. Anyone could scan ocean floors from their couch. Pixelated images sparked new theories. Every shadow became a pyramid. Every ridge became a road. The search went viral. Satellite imagery shows limits, not revelations. Ocean floors appear smooth from space. Currents carve deceptive patterns. Resolution creates false structures. Digital artifacts masquerade as ancient ruins. Professional expeditions cost millions. Deep-sea vessels venture to promising sites. They find seamounts and sediment fields. They map abyssal plains and underwater valleys. They discover wonders, but not Atlantis. The Mediterranean holds special allure. Ancient shorelines lie drowned beneath modern seas. Real cities rest in shallow waters. Roman ports sleep under sand. Greek harbors whisper through dive masks. Researchers found Helike, destroyed by earthquake in 373 BC. They located Pavlopetri, submerged off the Greek coast. They mapped Dwarka, the legendary city described in Sanskrit texts. Real lost cities exist, they're just not Atlantis. Technology improves the search constantly. Side-scan sonar penetrates murky depths. Remotely operated vehicles explore dangerous currents. Magnetometers detect buried metals. Each tool offers new hope. Marine archaeology faces harsh realities. Salt water destroys organic materials. Sediment buries evidence. Currents scatter artifacts. The ocean keeps its secrets jealously. Preservation requires specific conditions. Some formations tantalize researchers genuinely. The Yonaguni Monument off Japan resembles carved terraces. Underwater structures near India suggest submerged settlements. These sites deserve careful study. They're not Atlantis, but they matter. The hunt continues across every ocean. Teams investigate the Caribbean depths. They explore Mediterranean trenches. They probe Atlantic ridges. Each expedition teaches something new about our planet's hidden history. Funding flows toward sensational claims. We found Atlantis opens wallets. We found nothing closes them. This creates pressure to oversell discoveries. Caution doesn't sell television specials. Amateur hunters bring passion but lack training. They see patterns where none exist. They mistake natural for artificial. Their enthusiasm deserves respect. Their conclusions need verification. The real treasures lie in the search itself. Ocean exploration reveals climate history. Submerged landscapes tell stories of ice ages. Drowned shorelines map human migration. The hunt for Atlantis teaches us about Earth. Perhaps the city remains hidden in places we haven't looked. Perhaps it never existed at all. Perhaps the search matters more than the finding. The ocean holds countless secrets. Atlantis might be one of them, or it might be the dream that drives us to discover the rest. Alternative locations, from the Caribbean to Antarctica. The Caribbean sun beats down on turquoise waters. Below the surface, limestone formations catch the light. Local guides whisper about ancient cities. Tourists peer through snorkel masks at regular shapes in the coral. Charles Berlitz made the Bermuda Triangle famous. He saw more than mysterious disappearances in these waters. He saw Atlantis itself. Bimini's underwater roads proved it. Mysterious crystals powered the lost technology. The triangle's anomalies were after effects of the Great Catastrophe. The Caribbean offers tempting clues. Sea levels rose dramatically after the last ice age. Vast coastal plains disappeared beneath the waves. Indigenous peoples spoke of great floods. Underwater caves hold stalactites that once grew in open air. Graham Hancock dove into flooded cenotes off the Yucatan coast. He found carved pillars and stone platforms. The structures looked artificial. The dating seemed impossible. Could Maya legends preserve memories of Atlantis? Marine archaeologists approached these claims with care. They studied the formations systematically. Many were natural travertine deposits. Some showed evidence of ancient human activity. None matched Plato's descriptions of Atlantis. Antarctica presents a radical alternative. Ancient maps show the continent without ice. The Piri Reis map supposedly depicts Antarctic coastlines before glacial coverage. Could Atlantis lie frozen beneath miles of ice? Charles Hapgood promoted crustal displacement theory. Earth's crust could shift suddenly, he argued. Antarctica once enjoyed temperate climates. Advanced civilizations flourished there. Geological catastrophe buried them under ice. Satellite radar penetrates the Antarctic ice sheet. Scientists map the bedrock beneath. They find mountains and valleys. They discover subglacial lakes. They reveal a hidden landscape. No cities appear in the data. The Mediterranean holds conventional candidates. Santorini erupted catastrophically around 1600 BC. The explosion devastated Minoan civilization. Tsunamis reached distant shores. Could this be Plato's inspiration? Angelos Gallinopoulos championed the Santorini theory. He adjusted Plato's numbers by a factor of 10. 9,000 years became 900. Atlantis shrunk to fit the Aegean Sea. The parallels multiplied impressively. Crete's Minoan palaces echo Plato's descriptions. Knossos had running water and flush toilets. Sophisticated art covered the walls. The civilization dominated maritime trade. Then it vanished mysteriously. Archaeological evidence supports the Minoan connection partially. The civilization ended abruptly. Natural disaster played a role. Cultural memories could have preserved fragments. But Crete isn't Atlantis as Plato described it. The Black Sea attracts attention from marine archaeologists. Ancient shorelines lie submerged. The sea level rose dramatically 8,000 years ago. Coastal settlements drowned beneath the waters. Could one have inspired the Atlantis story? Robert Ballard explored the Black Sea's underwater landscape. His team found preserved shipwrecks in oxygen-free depths. They located drowned beaches and river channels. They discovered traces of human habitation. The finds were significant. They weren't Atlantean. Spain's Doñana National Park yielded intriguing discoveries. Satellite imagery revealed circular patterns in the marshland. The formations resembled Plato's concentric design. Ground-penetrating radar detected buried structures. Richard Freund led excavations in the Spanish wetlands. His team found ancient walls and channels. They uncovered evidence of tsunamis. They dated destruction layers to appropriate periods. The site showed promise. Further research revealed limitations. Every ocean holds Atlantis candidates. The North Sea conceals Doggerland drowned by rising seas. The Indian Ocean hides Kumari Kandam from Tamil legends. The Pacific conceals Mu from theosophical writings. Hope floats everywhere. Geology constrains the possibilities. Continental drift operates slowly. Ocean basins have stable histories. Large landmasses don't vanish overnight. The Earth keeps detailed records in rock layers. Technology narrows the search space. Satellites map ocean floors completely. Sonar penetrates marine sediments. Magnetometers detect buried structures. The hiding places grow fewer each year. Perhaps Atlantis combines multiple locations. Plato might have woven together various stories, Egyptian flood accounts, Minoan palace memories, and Caribbean indigenous legends could all contribute threads to his narrative. The search reveals something profound about human nature. We need lost golden ages. We require sunken wisdom. We demand hidden truths. Atlantis satisfies these needs regardless of its location. The search itself has become the destination. Atlantis as allegory. What was Plato really saying? Athens needed a mirror. The city-state had grown wealthy and proud. Democracy was turning into empire. Citizens were forgetting their duties. Plato watched the decline with philosophers' eyes. The Republic painted ideal societies in words. The laws prescribed perfect governance through reason. But abstract theory couldn't stir hearts like stories could. Plato needed a tale that would make people feel the danger. Atlantis served as Athens' dark reflection. Both cities began with noble intentions. Both possessed great wealth and power. Both commanded vast territories. Both forgot the price of hubris. The parallels weren't accidental. Plato crafted them deliberately. Ancient Athens fought Persian invaders heroically. Modern Athens built an empire carelessly. Ancient Athenians served justice. Modern Athenians served themselves. The timeline tells the deeper story. Plato set Atlantis 9,000 years before Solon's time. That placed its destruction around 9600 BC. The numbers might be symbolic rather than literal. 9 was sacred in Greek numerology. Multiples of 9 carried special meaning. The figure might represent completion or perfection. Plato could be saying that golden ages always end, that corruption follows creation inevitably. The geography speaks in symbols too. Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That meant beyond the known world, beyond the reach of Greek wisdom, beyond the protection of Greek gods. Water destroys the island completely. No trace remains for future generations. This wasn't simple natural disaster. This was divine judgment. The gods erased Atlantis from existence. Plato's Athens receives different treatment. The city fights bravely against impossible odds. It stands for justice against tyranny. It sacrifices itself to save others. Then earthquake and flood claim it too. Both cities sink on the same day. The timing can't be coincidental. Plato seems to be saying that good and evil share the same fate. that virtue and vice both face mortality, that earthly glory always ends. The Egyptian priests provide the framework. They preserve memories that Greeks have forgotten. They represent ancient wisdom watching human folly. They see patterns repeat across centuries. Critias tells the story at a symposium. He claims family connections to Solon. He promises to continue the tale. But the dialogue breaks off mid-sentence. The story remains forever unfinished. Some scholars see deliberate incompletion. Plato might be saying that human understanding always remains partial, that we never get the full story, that mystery surrounds all truth. The wealth of detail suggests careful construction. Plato describes Atlantean architecture precisely. He maps the island's geography systematically. He chronicles its political structure thoroughly. This isn't casual storytelling, yet the details serve the allegory. The concentric circles represent perfect order. The exotic metals symbolize corrupted values. The bulls in the temple suggest sacrifice and blood. Every element carries meaning. The moral degradation follows predictable steps. First comes prosperity without wisdom. Then comes power without restraint. Finally comes divine retribution without mercy. The pattern could apply to any civilization. Modern readers miss the philosophical context. Plato wasn't writing history or science fiction. He was teaching political theory through narrative. The story was meant to instruct, not entertain. The dialogue partners matter too. Timaeus represents mathematical knowledge. Critias represents historical memory. Hermocrates represents military wisdom. Together, they embody different aspects of human understanding. Plato might be warning about specialization's dangers. Each character knows part of the truth. None sees the complete picture. Knowledge fragments into competing versions. Wisdom becomes impossible. The unfinished ending invites participation. Readers must complete the story themselves. They must decide what Atlantis means. They must draw their own conclusions. The philosopher refuses to provide easy answers. Perhaps that's the deepest allegory of all. Truth isn't something we discover finished. Truth is something we create together. Stories become real when communities believe them. Meaning emerges from shared interpretation. Plato gave us a mirror disguised as a window. He showed us ourselves while pretending to show us others. Atlantis is every civilization that thinks it's eternal, every empire that believes it's exceptional, every people who forget that power comes with responsibility. The city beneath the waves reflects the cities above them. The story never ends because the pattern never stops. We are all Atlanteans, building our circles on uncertain ground. The memory of a sunken world, why we can't let go. Something deep inside us remembers Paradise Lost. Not specific places or times, but the feeling itself. The ache of knowing that something beautiful once existed and now lies beyond our reach. Atlantis feeds this hunger perfectly. It was everything we wish we could be. Advanced beyond imagination. Harmonious beyond belief. Powerful beyond fear. Then it vanished beyond recovery. The myth touches every culture separately. Greeks told of golden ages before iron ones. Hindus spoke of perfect yugas before corrupt ones. Judeo-Christian traditions remembered Eden before the fall. The details differ. The longing remains constant. Carl Jung would call Atlantis an archetype, a pattern that lives in humanity's collective unconscious. We don't learn about lost golden ages. We recognize them. They feel familiar because they express universal truths about desire and loss. Children embrace Atlantis naturally. They haven't learned skepticism yet. They haven't been taught that wonder is foolish. For them, underwater cities make perfect sense. Magic and technology can coexist. Anything is possible beneath the waves. Adults approach the myth more carefully. They demand evidence and explanations. They seek scientific validation. Yet something in them still wants to believe. The rational mind says no. The dreaming heart says maybe. The search for Atlantis never really seeks a place. It seeks a time when humanity lived differently, when wisdom governed power, when technology served spirit, when people remembered their connection to something greater than themselves. Every generation rediscovers Atlantis for itself. Victorians made it a lost race of superior beings. The 60s turned it into a spiritual homeland. New Age seekers see it as humanity's destined future. The myth adapts to each era's deepest needs. Science fiction inherits Atlantis' legacy. Stories about lost civilizations and forgotten knowledge echo the ancient dream. Whether the setting is Mars or Middle Earth, the theme remains the same. We were greater once. we could be great again. Environmental movements claim Atlantis as cautionary tale. The advanced civilization destroyed itself through arrogance. Climate change threatens modern society similarly. We must learn from the sunken world or join it beneath the waves. Technology enthusiasts see Atlantis differently. They imagine crystal-powered aircraft and telepathic communication. They believe we're rediscovering ancient knowledge. Every breakthrough brings us closer to Atlantean mastery. The internet creates new forms of searching. Online communities share theories and evidence. Satellite images spark fresh speculation. Social media spreads discoveries instantly. The hunt for Atlantis becomes a global collaboration. Yet the digital age also reveals the myth's true nature. Information travels faster than verification. Excitement spreads quicker than facts. The same technology that could find Atlantis also multiplies false hopes. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Atlantis works best as a moving target. As soon as we pin it down, it loses its power. The moment we find it, we no longer need it. The search itself provides what we're really seeking. The sunken world offers escape from present limitations. Modern life feels fragmented and meaningless to many people. Work seems pointless. Politics seem corrupt. Progress seems illusory. Atlantis promises that life once had different possibilities. It also provides comfort for mortality. Individual lives end quickly. Civilizations crumble eventually. Everything we build will someday fall. But Atlantis suggests that beauty and wisdom can outlast destruction. That memory preserves what matter cannot. The myth validates intuitive knowledge. Not everything true can be proven scientifically. Not everything real leaves physical evidence. Some truths live in stories and dreams. Some wisdom travels through hearts rather than books. Children understand this naturally. They know that Peter Pan is real even though he never existed. They feel that Narnia matters even though it's fictional. They grasp that truth and fact can be different things. Atlantis occupies the same territory. It's real in the way that hope is real, true in the way that longing is true, important in the way that dreams are important. It exists in the space between what is and what could be. That's why we can't let go. We need myths that make life larger than survival, stories that suggest meaning beyond material success, visions that point toward possibilities we haven't imagined yet. The memory of the sunken world lives in everyone who's ever felt that something important was missing, who've sensed that humanity has forgotten crucial knowledge, who've believed that we're capable of more than we currently achieve. Atlantis will always sink again because we need it to. The perfect civilization can't last. Paradise must be lost. The golden age has to end. Only then can we spend our lives trying to return to it. Atlantis will always sink again. The expedition boat rocks gently in morning swells. Another team prepares to dive. Another search begins. Cameras check their equipment. Historians review their theories. The hunt for Atlantis continues. This scene has played out countless times. Different oceans, different decades, same dream. Someone always believes they're close to the answer. The next dive will reveal everything. The final mystery will be solved. But Atlantis resists discovery by design. Not because Plato hid it too well, because we need it to stay hidden. The moment we find the city is the moment it stops being magical. The instant we solve the mystery is when it loses its power. Every culture creates its own version of the lost golden age. The Greeks had their age of gold. The Norse spoke of Asgard's glory. Celtic myths describe the otherworld's perfection. Hindu tradition recalls perfect yugas. The names change. The need remains constant. We require stories that suggest life could be different, that humanity once achieved harmony between wisdom and power, that technology and spirit once danced together, that paradise existed somewhere, somewhen, somehow. Modern searches miss this deeper truth. They look for physical proof of metaphysical needs. They seek geographical locations for psychological territories. They try to excavate dreams with sonar and magnetometers. The real Atlantis exists in the space between memory and imagination. It lives in the moment when we feel that something important has been lost. It breathes in the hope that something beautiful might be recovered. Children understand this instinctively. They don't need proof that wonderful things exist beyond their sight. They accept that some truths are too large for facts. They know that the most important realities can't be measured. Adults learn to demand evidence. They want coordinates and carbon dating. They need peer review and scientific validation. They forget that some knowledge arrives through different channels, that wisdom sometimes travels in stories rather than statistics. The cycle repeats endlessly across generations. Young people discover Atlantis with fresh wonder. They see possibilities their elders have forgotten. They believe in transformations their parents no longer imagine. Then time teaches them caution. Experience brings disappointment. Hope encounters reality's resistance. The bright dreams fade into careful questions. The believers become skeptics. The seekers become scholars. But something always remains. Some spark of the original wonder. Some ember of the first excitement. It waits quietly through the years of doubt. It glows softly beneath the ash of disillusionment. Then a grandchild asks about underwater cities. A student challenges accepted wisdom. A dreamer sees patterns in satellite images. The ember catches fire again. A new generation takes up the search. This is how myths survive, not by being proven true, but by being perpetually renewed. Each telling adds new details. Each generation finds fresh meanings. The story grows richer through retelling. Atlantis serves many functions simultaneously. It's a warning about the dangers of hubris, a promise that humanity can achieve greatness, a comfort that beauty survives destruction, a challenge to keep seeking what's been lost. The myth adapts to each era's specific needs. Victorian Atlantis reflected imperial anxieties. 60s Atlantis embodied countercultural dreams. New Age Atlantis promises spiritual evolution. Each version serves its time perfectly. Today's Atlantis faces new questions. Climate change makes the flood story eerily relevant. Artificial intelligence echoes concerns about technology's dangers. Social media creates instant global communities that could vanish just as quickly. Perhaps our version of Atlantis will be digital, a civilization that exists in virtual space, connected by networks instead of geography, powered by information instead of crystals, vulnerable to different kinds of destruction. Or maybe we'll discover that we are Atlantis, that our current world is the golden age future generations will dream about, that we're living in the paradise our ancestors imagined, that the sunken city was always a prophecy, not a memory. The beauty of the myth lies in its endless adaptability. Atlantis can be whatever we need it to be, ancient or future, physical or spiritual, warning or promise, lost or waiting to be found. It will always sink again because rising and sinking are the same motion in mythic time. What falls can rise, what's lost can be recovered, what ends can begin anew. The cycle continues forever. The next expedition is already planning. New theories are being developed. Fresh evidence is being analyzed. Someone believes they're on the verge of the greatest discovery in human history. They're absolutely right, and they're completely wrong. The greatest discovery isn't finding Atlantis. It's understanding why we need to keep looking for it. The real treasure lies not in the sunken city, but in the enduring hope that drives us to seek it. Atlantis will always sink again. Thank goodness. We would be lost without our dreams of what we've lost. We would be homeless without our memories of perfect homes. We would be hopeless without our faith that paradise, once upon a time, was real. The waves close over the legendary city one more time. The search begins anew. The story continues, as it always has, as it always will. As long as humans dream of being more than they are, Atlantis will call from beneath the waves.